Always fun every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Six o'clock on this Monday morning. We start a new working week with you on this, the 20th of November.
This is Breakfast with Eamonn, Holmes and Isabel Webster, and here's what's leading the news this morning.
Will he or won't he? Pressure ramping up on Jeremy Hunt to cut taxes ahead of the autumn statement on Wednesday. The Chancellor insisting everything is on the table.
You may be used to the snake pit of politics, but last night Nigel Farage went head first into a literal snake pit in the Australian jungle as he kicks off his stint on I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. We'll have all the latest shortly.
Just Stop Oil, they haven't gone away. They're set to cause chaos this week as they kick off their Take to the Streets protests, vowing to cause disruption every day until they win their battle against oil and gas. So how will an already stretched Metropolitan Police react?
And Paul Coit is here with your sport.
Yes, morning. Scotland draw 3-3 against Norway. Australia silence India. Max Verstappen is the new king of Vegas. And he even sang Viva Las Vegas when he won the race. Did you know that?
Did the lip movement.
Yeah, you can't see it under the helmet. Yeah, he did it.
And India nailed on search to win that World Cup.
I think...
Not my words.
I think you'll find that I did say that Australia were going to win on Thursday. I think you'll find. I think you will.
And what about the weather for the week? Here's Craig Schnell.
Good morning. It was a wet weekend for most of us. What does the weather have in store over the next few days? Find out shortly.
And you can join in any of our discussions by emailing gbviews@gbnews.com, or you can tweet us at GBNews.
Well, nice to have you on board with us this morning. Set to be another big week in Westminster. The Chancellor is keeping his cards close to his chest ahead of the autumn statement. That's going to happen on Wednesday.
Yes, tax cuts are just one of the measures being mulled by the Chancellor, who insists everything's on the table as he seeks to revive the economy. But which taxes might he cut?
One idea popular amongst Conservatives is cutting inheritance tax. Also cutting income tax. I think probably cutting any tax would be there. However, the Chancellor was at pains to warn against any moves that may fuel inflation.
That if we're going to be a dynamic, thriving, energetic, fizzing economy, we need low tax and we need taxes to be lower than they are at the moment. We're not going to do anything irresponsible, particularly by which I mean anything that fuels inflation.
But it's not just the Chancellor who's in the spotlight this week, as the Foreign Secretary, David Cameron, is set to be introduced to the House of Lords today for the first time. That's a week after his unexpected appointment by Rishi Sunak.
In the studio to discuss more, political commentator Andy Williams. So we now have to spend today, tomorrow and the next day guessing what Jeremy Hunt's going to do and not going to do. Has he got wriggle rumour, has he not?
Well, it sounds as though he has a lot more headroom than he thought he might have in terms of the ability to potentially make some tax cuts. Obviously, that's something that the government are very, very keen to do in the run-up to the general election, to give the public an offer, a reason to give them another 4 or 5 years in power. Clearly, they're talking about potentially a cut in inheritance tax, which to my mind is an interesting way of assessing your priorities. If you think you could do anything in terms of tax cuts, cutting a tax that only 3% of people pay, that seems a bit strange to me. Income tax cuts, of course, on the table, but the headroom is limited, and clearly, as much as Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt are saying that inflation's under control, it's still running at twice the rate it should be. So there are issues.
Can people not look at this country and see that it is crumbling around them, that investment in infrastructure is at its lowest since the Second World War? We've had 40-odd years of not investing in the health service, not investing in roads, not investing in the train infrastructure. We could go on and on and on. When is somebody going to realise we've got to start spending money on the infrastructure of the country?
I completely agree. You can see it, you can feel it. The trains don't work, the roads are in disrepair, our hospitals are falling down, and actually it's not entirely the result of this, but to a large extent it's a result of years of underinvestment by this government. And as much as Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt tried to reinvent themselves and say we're new and we're different, this has been 13 years of government that's underinvested, and now they're reaping what they sowed.
Do you think it's fair to say, a bit of a weird one for the Chancellor, in the sense that, he probably realises he hasn't got much time. He may even lose his seat at the next election, and certain wings of the party just absolutely furious with him for not having cut taxes already. I mean, he was at pains yesterday to say, I don't want to undo all the hard work that we've done in the last year, but he's in a very difficult position, isn't he, trying to balance all of this? I mean, the Institute for Fiscal Studies yesterday saying there isn't the headroom. So is there or isn't there?
Well, Jeremy Hunt, he's Mr. Cautious, he's Mr. Sensible. That's why he was given this job in the first place. And Rishi Sunak is of similar mind. I think in an ideal world, if they were running the economy and there was no electoral imperative, if there was no election coming up next year, they probably would just hold tight. But they know they're under huge pressure to cut taxes from a wing of the Conservative Party who actually they're never going to be able to keep happy. So if I was them, I'd look at what's best for the good of the economy in the long term, and that's probably actually holding fire.
Oh, God.
Or good for the Conservative voting base, as you say about inheritance tax and whatever, cutting that.
Well, again, only 3% of people pay it.
But it's buying votes, isn't it?
It might be, and I'm sure it's popular with some people, because there is a feeling that inheritance tax is unfair, that it's a tax on unearned income. Actually, in most cases, that's not really true, but there is a feeling that that's the case. So, yeah, it's a gimmick, I think, and I think Labour will paint it as a gimmick if they go down that route.
Well, it's interesting talking about Labour. Rachel Reeves was on the airwaves yesterday, and she refused to say that she would undo any changes to inheritance tax. So, it seems very much that they're going to shoot from the sidelines, but actually they'll probably stick with it.
Yeah, I mean, look, Labour's so far ahead in the polls, it has no incentive to say or do anything rash. So you're going to see a lot of very boring interviews from Labour shadow ministers, and particularly from Rachel Reeves, saying, well, we'll see, wait till our manifesto comes around, which is kind of the line that's being pushed out.
OK, Andy, thank you very much indeed. Andy Williams is a political commentator. His views throughout the programme. Commuters in London are set to be faced with more disruption. Climate activists will take to the streets from today to demand that the government stops all new licences for oil and gas.
Well, Just Stop Oil have vowed to slow march in traffic throughout the city until the government takes action. But how much support do the group have from the public?
Well, our London reporter Lisa Hartle with this.
Climate protesters Just Stop Oil are rarely out of the headlines, from stopping events such as Wimbledon, a performance of Les Miserables, through to smashing the glass of a painting in the London Gallery. More regularly, they take to slow marching on the roads, bringing traffic to a halt. James Harvey from Just Stop Oil says he understands the frustrations felt by the public, but their message to government needs to be heard. Stop all new oil and gas licences.
Disruption is a horrible thing to have to do to people's lives, and we know that it's very frustrating to be caught up in traffic. However, we know civil resistance works. There's a long track record of it working. We know we can't stop new oil and gas overnight. That's not what we're asking for. But we cannot afford, we simply cannot afford to dig any more up. Look at scientists like Peter Kalmus from NASA. You look at that IPCC report. All these people are saying the same thing: is we can't afford new oil and gas. We need to take action now. The situation is really dire, and if we don't take action, it's going to get a lot worse, with the harvest failures, with the floods, with the fires.
With their protests causing disruption to the public, I asked people how they felt about Just Stop Oil.
I think there is a climate emergency, and I think it's important that people have the right to protest. I do worry when I hear things about ambulances not being able to get through, but as a campaign group, it's important that they exist.
Yeah, I'm supportive of the general idea that we need to reduce our use of oil, but not those tactics, no. They just alienate people.
What do you think they should be doing instead?
Oh, I'm not sure I'm the right person to ask.
I think there's some interesting points to be made and a conversation to be had, but their tactics turns everyone off. And I don't think it's right, and it affects people's day-to-day lives, ambulances, people getting to work, so I think it's a negative effect overall.
You know, because a lot of people, you know, coming from work, you know, taking kids to school and coming back is a long day for everyone. And doing that protest and stopping road is just not going to help. There must be a better way for them to do things.
From today, the activists are carrying out a daily protest march from Trafalgar Square and are inviting the public to join them.
Every day we'll be marching. I don't know how long the police will let us march on the road for. You know, sometimes it's 20 minutes, sometimes it's an hour. Then their resources are very stretched at the moment, I know. And it'll be indefinite. So it'll be next week and the week after. For as long as people turn up to march, we'll keep on going until this government takes the action that's required.
The protest cost the Met millions of pounds to police and bring disruption to the public. But with scientists and the UN warning of the dire consequences of global warming, will those who oppose them now thank them in the future? Lisa Hartle, GB News, London.
Now, Nigel Farage started his jungle journey last night as I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here returned to our screens.
Sophie Reaper reporting now on all of the action from last night.
It is back. Returning for its 23rd season, ITV's I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here is officially back on our screens. Geordie duo Ant and Dec have returned once again, and as usual, we're enjoying the celebrities suffering a little too much.
I know it's been the easy bit.
Last night's episode saw 10 celebrities begin their journey down under, with rumours swirling about 2 potential late arrivals. But who do the British public think will clinch the title of this year's Jungle King or Queen?
I'm rooting for Josie Gibson because I love watching her on This Morning. I think she's really bubbly and a load of fun, and I think she'll be brilliant at the trials.
Sam Thompson, because I think he's absolutely hilarious.
Frankie Tesora, he's just an icon, isn't he?
Danielle Harold, because of the performance that she done in EastEnders, so I think she's going to get a lot of support from people for that.
Nella Rose, because she's absolutely fantastic.
Nigel Farage, because he's a lunatic. He's just crazy, isn't he? I just love him. He hasn't got a clue what he's doing here for the time, but he's a fantastic character, and it's what the jungle needs this year.
One of our very own, Nigel Farage, has already faced his first bush tucker trial.
Oh, they're horrible, aren't they?
Well prepared for life in the jungle, he told GB News that he's ready to push his boundaries and take a risk.
I've lived on news, numbers, information. To go away from all of that for several weeks is one really big challenge. To confront things that are obviously frightening, but have to deal with them and come through them, is a really good challenge.
Confident as he may be, though, the challenges have only just begun. And for Nigel and the rest of his campmates, there's still a long way to go before one of them is crowned this year's winner. Sophie Reaper, GB News.
Well, we got a glimpse of him there. Ben Leo, for us, is on the Gold Coast, keeping an eye on Nigel Farage and any other action that is going on there. Well, what do you make of it so far, Ben?
Yeah, great stuff last night on the opening show, but my main concern at the moment is I was going to open my chat with you, Eamonn, by cracking a joke about the fact that I'm loving it in the sunny summer of Australia here on the Gold Coast, but actually it's more like Bognor Regis than Brisbane, to be fair. And on a serious note, that's going to have a big impact on the guys in the camp, including Nigel, because not only are they tired and hungry, they're now going to be sodden through. The weather forecast for the next week, at least, is pretty much the same as this: grey and drizzly and wet. In terms of last night, what a cracking opening show. We got to see for the first time in detail Nigel's challenge in the outback 2,000 miles away from the Gold Coast here. He got knee deep in slime, sludge and grime and stuck his head into what ITV called a hellhole, which was a box full of snakes, essentially, where he had to use his tongue to unscrew some screws and nails in order to win stars for his campmates. He succeeded, he did really well, and going back into camp, it was the first public vote last night, so the British public got on their phones and made their votes for who they wanted to do the first Bush Tucker trial, which will take place in tonight's show. Surprise, surprise, our man Nigel is going in the first Bush Tucker trial with Nella Rose, the YouTuber, the influencer, in what is being called Jungle Pizza. Many details about it, but I assume it involves food, munching on some horrible animal organs, no doubt. And in terms of who's voting for Nigel throughout the series, I've got a bit of a theory. I think you've got his haters, the guys who hate him for Brexit, will never forgive him for yanking us out of the EU. But also, if you look online, a lot of his fans and his supporters are voting for him as well because they want to see him on TV. In terms of the whole episode, he came across really well. However, the bookies seem to think that other contestants, including EastEnders actress Danielle Harold, fared a bit better, so his odds have drifted to win the series thus far. But a cracking first episode, and lots to come tonight with his first Bush Tucker trial as well.
Looks as if Nigel's going to have to work for his money, doesn't it?
Yeah,
I mean,
it's a bit of a Matt Hancock, isn't it, all over again. But look, Matt Hancock got all the way to almost winning the crown, so maybe Nigel will do the same. He certainly has been doing well so far. I was going to say, Ben, that you got one of the best gigs in the industry being sent down there, but now it looks a little bit rainy. Perhaps we're not so jealous anymore, are we? Being down on the Gold Coast. Have a good one. Keep us posted on all developments, and we look forward to hearing all the details over the next few weeks.
Thank you, Ben Deal there.
Cheers, guys.
Right, thank you very much. 16 minutes past the hour of 6 o'clock. It's a Monday morning. You're tuned into Breakfast on GB News with Eamonn, Holmes and Isabel Webster.
And here's a reminder of our top stories this morning. Will he or won't he? Pressure is ramping up on the Chancellor to cut taxes ahead of this week's autumn statement, with Jeremy Hunt insisting everything remains on the table.
Nigel Farage has made a splash in the jungle. He may be used to the snake pit of politics, but he went headfirst into a snake pit in the Australian jungle as he kicked off his stint on I'm a Celebrity last night.
And the government is set to host a global summit today on world hunger alongside the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, with the PM set to speak at 9 o'clock. And we'll have all the latest here on GB News for you.
Now, the weather situation yesterday was a pretty miserable, dank sort of day, a bit chilly this morning. Let's get a look for the next few days. Here's Craig.
Good morning. Welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. I'm Craig Snell. Well, looking ahead to today, for many of us, we're going to see a good deal of cloud around, and there still will be some rain in places. So we start this morning. Need to watch out for some heavier rain across some southern counties of England. Could be quite a wet commute here. Elsewhere, again, a good deal of cloud around and fairly damp. For parts of East Midlands, East Anglia, South East England, actually, it will turn quite sunny for a time, but it won't last. And come the afternoon, a lot of us seeing a good deal of cloud. That rain potentially turning quite persistent across the far north of Scotland, but for most of us, it is another fairly mild day, perhaps maybe not as mild as it was over the weekend. Into tonight, again, a lot of cloud across the UK. That rain still fairly persistent across northern Scotland. That will sink its way a little bit further southwards as we go through the course of the night. So that will allow clearer skies across the far north of Scotland and Northern Ireland. So here, actually, we could just see a touch of frost as we start Tuesday morning. But elsewhere, it's another mild start to the day. So into Tuesday for England and Wales, it's kind of a rinse and repeat. A lot of cloud around again. Still the risk of some outbreaks of rain, especially across the east. Scotland and Northern Ireland seeing some sunnier skies. The sunshine quite hazy at times, and then later on in the day we start to see some thicker cloud and outbreaks of rain arriving to the far northwest. But for most of us, it's another fairly mild day. Top temperatures 10 to 12 degrees in the south.
Well, coming up, we'll be looking at the legacy of the former First Lady Rosalynn Carter, wife of American President Jimmy Carter. She passed away last night at the age of 96.
We'll also be focusing on the sport. Scotland drew with Norway last night and England are back in action this evening facing North Macedonia. Paul Coit will have all the details for us.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist. And you survived? I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like? I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three. Oh!
No, thank you. My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GBNews.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Jimmy Carter was the 39th President of the United States, and his wife, Rosalynn, has passed away now at the age of 96.
Yeah, Rosalynn Carter was diagnosed with dementia back in May and joined her 99-year-old husband in end-of-life treatment when she entered the hospice care at home on Friday.
He was one of the nation's leading mental health advocates, both in and out of time in the White House, as was his wife. We're joined by former advisor to Presidents Clinton and Bush administrations, Steve Gill, for this. Steve, tell us about Rosalynn Carter.
Are you able to hear us yet at all, Steve? A few problems with the sound then. We'll just see if we can sort that out. I've been reading a little bit about her this morning, Eamonn, and it really seems like Rosalynn Carter sort of cut out the role of First Lady, the first one really to kind of establish a sort of a specific role for the spouse of the president. And I think she attended cabinet meetings, or at least very senior level meetings, and then, as you mentioned, got very involved in mental health issues. But they'd met as children, and it was the sweetest love story, and had been very, very devoted to one another, had 4 children. But I think she set out the model, basically, that many of the First Ladies continued, such as Michelle Obama, who focused very much, I think, on food and nutrition, and Jill Biden's talks a lot about education. But it's the role of the spouse. It must be a difficult role because you can't be seen to be too political.
Let's see if Steve Gill is hearing us. Steve, are you there?
Yes, I am. Good morning.
Fantastic.
Yes, Steve, we're just trying to wonder how you would remember or how you would classify Rosalynn Carter.
I think if you look up the word Southern Charming Lady in the dictionary with a capital L, she's probably the first thing that would pop up. Yeah, the Carter administration ended quickly and bad politically. He was not the most competent president, but he and Rosalynn Carter were the best example of how to be post-president and post-first lady, I think, in history. Their humanitarian efforts, they built homes for the homeless in Plains, Georgia, and around the country for years after they left. And again, I think they have left a legacy of the best way to serve in a fractious era in politics after you leave public office.
They had a lovely love story as well. I think he famously said the best decision of his entire life was to marry Rosalynn Carter. But I was reading this morning that he was actually present at her birth, or at least met her a few hours later. So they really did know each other for their entire lives, from a small town in Georgia.
And a very long life each. You know, he is in healthcare, hospice, and she obviously just passed, but into their mid to late 90s. So it is an amazing, lengthy love story, and I think you can't look at the pictures of them during the course of their life together and not see absolute adoration between the two. And again, it's an example of not only how to live, but how to live well.
Fantastic. How do you think America will remember Rosalynn specifically? Because we were talking a moment ago about how she really sort of forged a role for the First Lady in a way that hadn't been done before, which has kind of been replicated by lots of First Ladies ever since.
Well, and he made it clear that she was his top advisor, that a decision without consulting her, without considering what she had to say. And as you said, she really kind of changed the role of the First Lady, much more professional, really not in the fisticuffs of politics, but certainly as an advisor on the issues of the day. She was front and center, and he gave her all the credit in the world.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Steve Gill is a former presidential advisor. Thank you very much indeed, Steve. Time to go through all the latest sports news. Let's go to Paul for that. European Championship qualifiers.
Yes.
So Scotland played last night.
They did 3-3 against Norway. No Erling Haaland playing for Norway, but it was a funny old game. Did someone say that once before? It's a funny old game. Funny old game, Saint. But it was. So 3-3. England played tonight. And also, as far as Scotland are concerned, I should mention that they've already qualified for the European Championships, which happens in Germany next year, with a couple of games to spare. So kind of a dead rubber. It would have helped if they come first, but Spain came first in their group and second, so they've qualified, which is the main thing. And England...
What shape are England in for tonight?
They're OK. I mean, this should be all right. Shouldn't be a problem. They weren't very good on Friday. That needs to be said. They really weren't very good against Malta. You should be scoring 9 or 10 against Malta, shouldn't you? I mean, with respect to Malta. But it was 3. They're playing North Macedonia. So they're obviously already qualified as well. So this is the last game in the European Championship, and then that's the end of the international break.
Look, we talked about India. The machine for India in the Cricket World Cup was so good. It was very hard to see them not winning, but Australia did a really fantastic job against them.
Well, India, they've won 10 games on the trot. Everything thrown at them, they've won. It's a home tournament. 92,000 people at Ahmedabad that were going to watch the final, and it got quieter and quieter and quieter as they went through. And, you know, I did have a feeling that it was going to happen, because Australia, when it comes to World Cups, that's what they do. They win, and here comes that word again. It's momentum. They started slowly, Australia. They lose their first 2 games. First one was against India, ironically, and then it starts to build and starts to build. They're a great World Cup side, and they were brilliant yesterday.
The thing is, though, Australia, I feel, are just so strong in so many sports.
Yeah.
And if you were to pick one particular sport, I couldn't pin them down. And I suppose if you were to choose one particular sport for us, I guess we're a football nation.
Yeah.
But if you ever travel to India, they are obsessed with cricket. Every tuk-tuk I got into, all they wanted to talk about was cricket. Who was our favourite player? Had I been to Lord's? Many of them walking around with cricket balls. So I feel sorry for them. They will be devastated.
Well, they will be devastated because it was expected and everything went so well, and it was something that, it was the home tournament and everybody expected India to win. And like you say, it's a huge. It's huge in sport. And the fact that they didn't, is very upsetting for the country and a real surprise. But Australia were brilliant and deserved to win. There's no question about it.
Funny old game, as they say.
It's a funny old game, isn't it?
A new game for Las Vegas, Formula One. How did it look?
Right, so it did look very good. Started off badly with there's like a manhole cover, and then things got better, and it was arguably the best race of the season, and he's done it again. So Max Verstappen has come through, another win, completely unstoppable, and you know what I really loved was what he did at the end. All we've been talking about is Elvis and Viva Las Vegas. He obviously watches the show.
I was thinking, did he copy you two boys?
I've got a feeling because you've got him in the cockpit as he's coming through, and it was played through, and I think we've got. I think hopefully we.
But not quite outstanding enough. Las Vegas, Viva Las Vegas. I thought you'd enjoy that, mate. Well done.
There you go. He might be a good driver, but he's a
terrible singer. He's got nothing.
Christian Horner, who's the principal, because he played it through, and so he played it through to him. And this is what Max Verstappen said: "I cannot leave them hanging. So I had to sing, but I definitely need some singing lessons. I need to go to Jerry because Jerry Horner, Jerry Halliwell, the Spice Girls, married to Christian Horner, and I need to book some lessons with her, I guess. But then again, I don't know whether he's heard her sing. So I'm not sure whether that is probably a good idea.
Well, maybe she knows how to make the best of what you've got.
That's
comment.
Well done. Very well said.
And tennis, the ATP title went to Novak Djokovic.
Surprise, surprise. Yeah. You're not very happy about that, are you?
It's just, it's not that exciting in tennis anymore. He just wins everything.
I know, he
does. He is, that is an incredible talent.
But to go from there, then he's got the Davis Cup on Thursday, playing against Britain. So maybe we get him feeling a little tired after winning the ATP. I don't know.
So what is the Davis Cup?
Davis Cup is it's changed over the years. It's the big country tournament. It used to just be America and Britain, and then everybody else is involved. So I tell you, it's a complicated competition. But anyway, we will be playing Serbia on Thursday.
Thanks, Paul. See you in an hour's time. Thank you very much indeed. The time, 6:30. Breakfast in GB News with Eamonn and Isabel. Here's a reminder of the top stories on this Monday morning.
Will he or won't he? Pressure is ramping up on the Chancellor to cut taxes ahead of this week's autumn statement, with Jeremy Hunt insisting everything remains on the table.
He may be used to the snake pit of politics, but last night Nigel Farage went head-to-head in a first literal snake pit in the Australian jungle as he appeared on I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here.
And the government is set to host a global summit today on world hunger. That's alongside the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. The Prime Minister is set to unveil a long-term plan for new international cooperation. He's giving a speech just after 9, and we will be following it closely here.
Oh, and then there are more stories around coming into the newsroom. Far-right outsider has won Argentina's presidential elections. The former US President Donald Trump congratulated the victory, saying he would make Argentina great again. The election comes at a difficult time, which Argentina is one of the world's highest inflation rates.
Extreme weather like flooding and wildfires is threatening nearly 3/4 of sites managed by the National Trust. The charity says climate change is the single biggest threat facing over 28,000 of its historic homes. In a report, the Trust urged the government to do more to help organisations adapt to the threat posed.
Russell Brand has been questioned by police over alleged historical sex offences. This comes after an investigation revealed allegations of rape, sexual assaults and emotional abuse against the British comedian and actor. Brand has denied the claims.
Stay with us. Coming up, we'll be discussing the protest against anti-Semitism that gathered outside Downing Street last night. Join us for Headline Makers next.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
And the time's creeping up to 25 to 7. Joining us to go through some of the day's headlines, the journalist and political commentator Suzanne Evans and Mike Buckley as well. Very good to see you both. Mike, we're going to start here with a viral video together with our big story here. Protest against anti-Semitism outside Downing Street last night.
Yeah, so this is about one of the parents of one of the hostages. Very sadly, a 9-year-old girl was taken hostage, and the father, Thomas Hand, was involved in a protest outside Parliament last night, protesting about anti-Semitism in the UK, but of course globally as well, and also talking about the plight of his daughter, who very recently had her 9th birthday while taken as a hostage.
Oh, I can't imagine.
So it's a personal tragedy in the midst of a much wider tragedy that's of course affecting so many people in Gaza.
Brings it to life, doesn't it?
Yeah,
As a mother of an 8-year-old, this really speaks to me. Let's have a look at this viral video then, where we can see Thomas Hand speaking.
She is now in the hands of the Hamas, down deep in the tunnels of Hamas. She's had her birthday in the tunnels of Gaza. She's now 9. She didn't celebrate her birthday like any other normal kid in the world. There was no birthday cake. There was no party.
Now, all of this happening just when, Suzanne, we believe we're on the brink of a hostage agreement.
Yes, this is what Israel is saying. The Hamas is saying that they think they're going to have a release of hostages in exchange for possibly a 3-day ceasefire. Now, of course, it's very difficult, isn't it? We talk very much in general terms about war. We forget about this close, human, appalling situation that every one of those hostages and their families is in. And we tend to say, well, there shouldn't be a ceasefire or there should be a ceasefire. And then you see something like this and it just brings it home to you. How can Israel realistically watch something like that and not do everything it can to get those people free, which of course it wants to do, but it knows that if it has that ceasefire, Hamas is going to regroup, remass, it will have chance to get its weaponry back in order, it'll have chance to get more fuel supplies together and potentially launch another attack.
But it looks as though that's exactly what's going to happen, Mike.
I doubt that Hamas has the capacity for another attack. I mean, I think we all were staggered that it put forward the attack that it did, given the situation, pre-October the 7th, when Gaza was supposedly locked down from all sides. But I'd be very surprised if now Israel's giving it its full attention, it had the capacity for another attack.
People sort of saying this could mark a sort of change in this ongoing war, I suppose you can call it. But I believe there's only 50 hostages thought to be involved in this particular deal. That leaves a significant number still within the Strip, which suggests to me this is not going to end anytime soon, because Israel have said time and again, we leave no man behind. It's just how much further this can go on. I mean, we've seen the pictures over the weekend of these babies being evacuated to Egypt, thankfully, but also these reports of Hamas using tunnels underneath Al-Shifa Hospital. An unimaginable dilemma, really.
Well, you have to wonder how long this can go on, given the numbers of people who've now died in Gaza. I mean, obviously, the original 1,700 that died in Israel, absolutely horrific, and we can all accept that and recognise that and the tragedy of that. But we're up to, what, 12,000, 13,000 people now have died in Gaza. You just have to wonder how long this can go on before somebody, I mean, Joe Biden would be the obvious example, would just say, this has to stop.
What's going to start under Jeremy Hunt come Wednesday? Got a headline front page of the Mail today. Are we finally on the brink of a real tax cut? So how long is he going to tickle us all with this one, and will he or won't he, Suzanne?
I think you've hit the nail on the head there, Eamonn, tickling. This is what the Conservative Party does ahead of every election, isn't it? We've got about a year to go now to an election. And guess what? We have the tax burden at a 70-year high, and suddenly we're talking about tax cuts. Well, is it electioneering? Oh, yes, I think it is. Now, this week, originally at the beginning of the week, we had, last week, we had talk about that he was going to scrap inheritance tax. Now that seems to be off the table, and now we're talking about tax cuts. The big bank, the US bank, JP Morgan, came out this week and said that they thought he had around £5 to £10 billion to play with to make tax cuts because government borrowing is not as high as it was said to be by the Office for Budget Responsibility. So that equates to a 1p cut on both, say, income tax, the basic rate of income tax and the higher rate of income tax. But will he do it? Won't he do it? It remains to be seen. As I say, this is something that seems to always happen at about this time in the electoral cycle.
I mean, one thing's for sure, he would cut taxes if he could, absolutely desperate to, because, you know, that's what the Conservatives believe in. But he also would argue, wouldn't he, that arguably making tax cuts could be, A, inflationary, but also he's nowhere near his target of reducing debt to GDP. So do you think this is desperation, or do you think that this is actually fiscal prudence?
I don't think it's fiscal prudence for a minute. I don't think it's prudence for the country either. I mean, I do think he kind of has to do this now because they've talked it up for a good week. If they don't cut taxes now, it will be seen as a letdown by so many people who want a tax cut rather. But I was reading.
Please don't get that the wrong way around.
Don't get the wrong way around.
No more tax
But I was
rises.
reading elsewhere in the Times this morning. So the Times starts with talking about we're going to have a tax cut, and then it's on page 5 or 7 or something. It points out again that the NHS is in complete meltdown, and they have a target to bring down taxation, but they also have a target to bring down waiting lists, and it just isn't happening because they're not putting the money in and they're not paying attention to it. And I actually think, in terms of a vote winner, they'd get more votes for sorting out the NHS than bringing down tax. But I suspect that the right way, the Conservative Party does not agree with me.
Yeah, Mike, there's another great story here, and this reeks of desperation. And thousands of pounds, up to £10,000 over 10 years, could be cut from your energy bill if you agree to live beside a massive eyesore of an electric pylon. Now, not only were these eyesores, but I remember 20 years ago they were being deemed as harmful to people's health with the electric fields that they build up and whatever. And when you see a picture of this, and I know many houses, you have these nearby new developments that they're built in the back gardens and things. Who would have, I mean, Suzanne, would you have that in your back?
I've deliberately not bought houses, Eamonn, because that was in the back garden or very close. As I say, the jury, I think, is out on the health impact, but I certainly don't trust that they don't have some kind of health impact. I used to have to cycle underneath a pylon when I went to see my best friend when I was a teenager.
And you hear it buzz.
And you could hear it buzz.
Feel
I
it,
used
probably.
to go as fast as I could because I hated it. I certainly wouldn't want to. And I think paying somebody to basically potentially put their health at risk next to one of these things is an appalling
But, Mike, here's the thing. So I say, yeah, OK, you can build that in my back garden and I'll take £1,000. Thank you very much indeed. So 5 doors up lives Isabel, who says, I'm not having that in my back garden. I'd just like to know how they higgledy-piggledy build this. Do they veer off to the left and then back in again? How on earth is this going to work?
I think in the end people won't have a choice, and they'll have to take it, and they'll presumably then just get the money taken off their bill or whatever. Because the thing is, we're producing energy in different places. We used to produce energy in power stations. We've got the infrastructure for that. We're now producing energy, loads of offshore wind. We'll increasingly have more solar and onshore wind as well. We've got to transport that energy to the grid, and currently the infrastructure isn't there to do it.
You can bury them. You don't have to have these things. You can put the cables underground.
But that's expensive.
But it's very, very expensive.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember looking into the cost of this when I was a local councillor in the London Borough of Merton, because we wanted to bury some near Merton Abbey Priory, which is a very historic site, and there are pylons built on top of it. And back then, that was in sort of 2010, it cost £1 million each. So yes, it's very expensive.
Gosh, £1 million each.
And that was back in 2010.
So if £1,000 cheap, if someone says, yeah, I'll have that in my back garden, that's a very cheap trade.
It is, indeed.
That is, right.
Should we talk about working from home, Mike? This is a story in The Express about plans to allow civil servants working from home to do so from the beach, which have angered Conservative MPs.
I mean, I think this is a bit of a storm in a teacup, really. I was reading about this the other day, and I think the government department in question, I can't remember which one it is now, basically said this would only happen in incredibly exceptional circumstances. So I think it's something that might happen once in a blue moon that's been extrapolated by The Express into a story of, you know, they're kind of very anti-working from home, aren't they? Which I understand, because there's been quite a lot of evidence now saying that productivity is higher if people go into an office. So I'm in favour in most circumstances of people going into an office. But I think this is a bit of a non-story, to be honest.
But should they be able to work from the beach, civil servants, even if it is a rarity?
No, I don't think they should. I mean, I think people should, generally speaking, in that kind of role, be going into an office.
But I mean,
and on
I
occasion
suppose
working from home where flexibility is required for health or childcare reasons or something like that.
I'm thinking of Afghanistan, and when you've got something unexpected in the middle
Well,
of
you
the
had
summer
Dominic Raab
holidays.
working
Well,
from the
exactly.
beach, didn't
So
you?
could you, well, or not, as the case may be. But you know, there might be situations where actually it'd be quite useful to be able to log on and get involved in any emerging or breaking news story. So
I mean, the world of work has changed, and it's not going to go back to the way that it was. Lots of people can now work from anywhere, but I think there is indeed, obviously, there's an advantage if you're in the same room with the people you're working with, particularly in a very high pressure and important job like the civil service.
Now, the two of you, I want you to look at a photograph which has gone viral, and it's of a little fox, and the little fox is on board a tube.
oh, look.
So there
I mean,
it
I
is.
say look, but actually they are predators, aren't they? They could
they are
attack you.
Out of control in London, I think. I live in the countryside, in the Shropshire countryside. We absolutely loathe them. My lovely friend Jill, she had 18 chickens. She's now got 6 because the fox has had them all. Where is the Remain lawyer Jolyon Maugham when you need him?
What, to club a fox?
This is the
Come
guy,
on
do you
now.
remember, who on Boxing Day clubbed a fox to death with his baseball bat. Not good enough for Jill if she has to wait till Boxing Day. I'm afraid they'll all be gone by then.
They're still, you know,
I know, it looks very cute.
fluffy.
He looks very cute, let's be honest. I mean,
Looks
to be honest, I always quite
deceptive.
like seeing a fox wandering around town whenever I see one, but maybe I'm unusual.
I had insomnia last night, and I found myself at 1 a.m. ordering fox-shaped doorknobs for my bedroom cupboard door.
Oh, why not?
As you do, like little bronze ones that just look curled up exactly like
That's
that.
fine, they won't kill any
They're
chickens.
very
I approve
sweet.
of
I
those.
thought you were going to say you find yourself ordering a pizza or something, you know,
No,
Chinese
just I had to
takeaway.
order some hardware, as you do.
Suzanne.
Where do you want to go now?
This is the Daily Express. I smuggle 6,000 migrants a year into the UK on small boats. Business has never been better. Tell us the story.
Well, this is, it's exactly as you've described it. The Daily Express has gone to Albania. They have interviewed a people smuggler who says he's making at least £50,000 a year from this trade. It just makes me think, you know, we have so many people in this country that say, oh, these people are refugees, they're struggling, they should be welcomed into this country. I'm sorry, they are not. They are illegal immigrants. They are paying, well, let's just take his salary alone, 6,000 of them 50k, that's £8,000 each. They're paying £8,000 each to come over here on these small boats. And the other interesting thing this people smuggler says is that most of them want to come here to work in cannabis farms because it's incredibly well paid. I find that absolutely fascinating. The other thing he mentions, though, is that ultimately it's not him in control of this trade. It's a much, much bigger gang of Kurdish people who are running these crossings. They have to be stopped.
Cannabis farms are the future for all of us then, are they?
Well, they're certainly the future. Obviously, these people coming over in boats, according to this report, is where it's at. Yes. I don't know how much you get paid for working in a cannabis farm.
But it's obviously better
I'm
than...
sure the working regulations aren't very good, or the conditions probably aren't very good. No.
Highly illegal.
Talking about working conditions not very good, the jungle, I'm a celebrity. Mike, what do you make of Nigel Farage's gamble, because that's what it is, I suppose, entering the jungle?
I think he is a man who is desperate for attention, and he is a man who's been out of the headlines because Brexit has happened and hasn't worked out the way that he promised that it would. And he sees this as a way, to make some cash, because he keeps telling us how poor he is, and also as a way to get back in the papers. I mean, my worry is I think his presence in our country, in our public discourse, has been absolutely toxic for a good 15, 16 years now. My worry is that this does something to rehabilitate him and give him more prominence in the run-up to the next general election, which I don't think will be good for the future of our country. I think it's quite irresponsible, actually, if I'm a celebrity, to put him on.
I mean, you know, it still leaves a bad taste in my mouth, Matt Hancock in there last year. I don't like that sort of, inverted commas, rehabilitation, which he didn't get at the end of the day.
Wasn't he still an MP at the time?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is even
still
more.
is.
Yeah.
Oh, is he still
Yeah,
technically?
he is. He's not a Tory anymore. They removed the whip, but no, he's sat there to the next election.
Oh, gosh, I hadn't.
Creaming in the cash, presumably not doing much work.
But I think what people will see, Suzanne, is Nigel Farage is a very charismatic, a very charming sort of person. Do you think some people will be surprised at the man they begin to see emerging from the jungle?
I think they will. I mean, I used to work with Nigel Farage. I can't accept the representation of him as being toxic. I think he's been very much a voice of common sense in this country, and I think he says what a lot of people are thinking.
Well, no, I mean, you might agree with his opinions, but it's highly divisive because, you know, almost half the country totally disagreed. So that's what a lot of people would say is...
Well, they can say that, but, you know, in terms of him going into the jungle, I think it's quite interesting. I had a look at some of his initial tasks in the jungle. He just rolled his sleeves up, he got on with it, he stuck his head into a van full of snakes, he was mooching around in some ghastly gunk, I don't know what it was, laughing and joking, and just got on with the job, and that's the kind of man he is, and I think it comes across quite well.
Rosalynn Carter passed away, age 96. We've been talking about her a little bit this morning. First Lady to President Carter. Your tributes, your memories, your...
I don't have any memories of Rosalynn Carter, I'm afraid.
Really? Not growing up and hearing about her?
No, I mean, I remember Jimmy, but I was too young to know anything about Rosalynn, to be honest. But, I mean, I do know that she kind of set the tone for future First Ladies, in lots of ways. And obviously, Jimmy he was only a one-term president. He didn't win and was replaced by Reagan. So, to a degree, a failure. But widely respected across the political spectrum in the US. And there aren't many people in that very divisive country now who do respect people on all sides. And Jimmy, I think, has been respected on all sides. And I'm sure Rosalynn would have been as well.
Right, Mike, got to cut across. You were going to the break, and right after that, we're going to be speaking to Gareth Davies. He's the Secretary to the Exchequer and the Treasury. We're going to be back with him after this.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests, and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
more energy this time.
Welcome to the dinosaur hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
you know?
Right, we are joined this morning by the Exchequer Secretary to the Treasury, Gareth Davies. A very good morning to you. Thanks for joining us. Look, lots of people talking about what we can expect from the autumn statement on Wednesday. I know, of course, you'll be limited in what you can say, but perhaps you can give us an indication what you would like to see on your Christmas list, perhaps for an early Christmas present from the Chancellor.
Well, good morning and thank you very much for having me. I think, look, as we've seen last week, we've managed to get inflation down now to well below 5%. We've cut that in half like we committed to at the start of this year, and that lays the foundation for economic growth. And so this autumn statement will be focused on boosting growth, and there'll be two parts to that. First of all, stimulating more business investment and ensuring that we increase workforce participation. So those two things is what the autumn statement will focus on, because ultimately we need to get our economy growing.
Yes.
And you're going to get it growing in Leeds and in West Yorkshire. And I'm just seeing today that Leeds is the top paying city already outside London. So the salaries are quite attractive in Leeds in general. The average pay for a job in Leeds is £37,800. So it seems like this is the place to be, and you're honing in on that.
Yeah, so we have a programme called Investment Zones Policy Programme, which essentially is taking 8 investment zone locations in England, 4 in the devolved administrations, where the government is providing extra funding to enable local authorities to cut taxes, to attract new businesses, or to spend the envelope that we provide them. And today we're announcing that West Yorkshire is our 3rd investment zone with an anchor tenant that will hopefully go on to provide around 2,500 jobs for the area. This is, as you point out, just one of a number of investments in Yorkshire and in Leeds, but we're very pleased about it, and the Chancellor will be there today.
Interesting, though, tax relief is a sort of an admission from you there that, cutting taxes can lead to growth. But do you worry that if on Wednesday we do see tax cuts, A, it could be inflationary, and B, it might harm you in your ambition to reduce debt to GDP, both significant concerns for this particular Parliament?
Absolutely. We've always been clear that inflation is our #1 priority. It's what makes everybody poorer. It is the most effective tax cut that we can provide the British people. As that has now been cut in half, and by the way, we've got further to go. The Bank of England target is still 2%, so we're not complacent about it. But we've always been clear as well that if we reduce the tax burden, we can't do so at the expense of sound money, and we certainly don't want to fuel inflation with a tax cut. And so that's why we're very mindful. That's why we had inflation as our #1 target, and it's meant that we've had to take some very difficult decisions. As you say, we've got high debt, too high of debt, and so we need to be mindful of that too. So there's a lot of moving parts, but ultimately inflation remains our #1 target.
And do you accept that is at the expense of the country literally crumbling, whether it's schools crumbling through rack concrete, whether it is infrastructure with train lines crumbling, roads crumbling, whatever, investment in the infrastructure of the country hasn't been lower since the Second World War. So it's a terrible decision to have to make, that we give you a tax cut, which we can see why that's important, or we just let the country go further and further into decline, maybe an NHS system that can't be revived.
Well, I dispute that. There's a significant amount of capital investment funding going into infrastructure, 600 billion of both private and public sector funding going into infrastructure. We've got the largest investment in our rail network that we've ever seen. We've got record funding going into our NHS, and the same is true for education. We've seen standards improve in education. We are tackling the backlog.
I mean, to me, comparatively, these figures don't stack up. I mean, it is the pits. It is absolutely the pits, and the country is crumbling before our very eyes. Now, you know and I know you haven't got enough money to put into the country, but why are you giving what little we have back elsewhere without reinvesting it?
Well, we are investing significant sums into our infrastructure and our public services, but as you allude to, it isn't all on the public sector. We must stimulate more private investment. Taxes are one part of that, but it's about other things, such as planning. It's about ensuring that decisions can be made quickly when an organisation wants to invest in our country. So there's lots of different factors at play, but it will require both public and private capital to get our country growing and to build the things that we all want to see.
OK, Gareth Davies, that's all we've got time for. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. That's the Exchequer Secretary to the Treasury this morning. Thank you.
Still to come, Israel, hopeful that a possible deal to release hostages is near. We'll be heading to Tel Aviv for the latest. But first, let's have a look at your weather picture.
Good morning. Welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. I'm Craig Snell. Well, looking ahead to today, for many of us, we're going to see a good deal of cloud around, and there still will be some rain in places. So we start this morning. Need to watch out for some heavier rain across some southern counties of England. Could be quite a wet commute here. Elsewhere, again, a good deal of cloud around and fairly damp. For parts of East Midlands, East Anglia, South East England, actually it will turn quite sunny for a time, but it won't last. And come the afternoon, a lot of us seeing a good deal of cloud. That rain potentially turning quite persistent across the far north of Scotland, but for most of us, it is another fairly mild day, perhaps maybe not as mild as it was over the weekend. Into tonight, again, a lot of cloud across the UK. That rain still fairly persistent across northern Scotland. That will sink its way a little bit further southwards as we go through the course of the night. So that will allow clearer skies across the far north of Scotland and Northern Ireland. So here, actually, we could just see a touch of frost as we start Tuesday morning. But elsewhere, it's another mild start to the day. So into Tuesday for England and Wales, it's kind of a rinse and repeat. A lot of cloud around again. Still the risk of some outbreaks of rain, especially across the east. Scotland and Northern Ireland seeing some sunnier skies. The sunshine quite hazy at times, and then later on in the day we start to see some thicker cloud and outbreaks of rain arriving to the far northwest. But for most of us, it's another fairly mild day. Top temperatures 10 to 12 degrees in the south.
Hello there, very good morning. You're tuned into breakfast here in GB News with Eamonn, Holmes and Isabel Webster. The time is fast approaching 7 o'clock and leading the news on this Monday morning.
Well, ahead of this week's autumn statement, pressure is ramping up on Chancellor Jeremy Hunt to cut taxes as he insists everything remains on the table.
Israel's IDF has released CCTV claiming to show footage of hostages being taken into Gaza's Al-Shifa hospital on the day of Hamas's October the 7th attack. It comes as talks begin about an imminent release of hostages.
In other news, Just Stop Oil is set to cause chaos this week as they kick off their Take to the Streets protest, vowing to cause disruption every day until they win their battle against oil and gas. So, how will the Metropolitan Police react? We'll be questioning it.
The sport, Paul's got that.
I do. After nearly 2 months, the Cricket World Cup is finally over. And Australia beat, well, the home favourites, India. Max Verstappen wins in Las Vegas. And how about this? The golfer who loses 3 clubs on one hole. Not balls.
Clubs.
Clubs. Have you ever lost a club playing?
No, but I know people who've ended with their clubs up trees and things.
I've had that.
Yeah.
Yeah, raining.
Yeah.
Club flew out. I never found the club.
3 times.
3 times, and that's in professional golf.
Was it raining?
Well. It wasn't raining. It was a fit of pique.
Oh.
It was a... Yeah!
Three times?
3 times. Well, the other 2 were him trying to get the other club back, but I'll tell you later.
We should also say the other big sporting result of the weekend was Angela Rippon falls at the 8th fence.
I know, fancy that. I thought she was going to go in the whole way.
Isn't that when Ruthie fell as well?
Yeah.
The 8-week hurdle.
Yeah, so, but anyway, well done to her. She's done very well.
To Blackpool.
And she made it to Blackpool.
Yeah, made it to Blackpool.
She's been there before, but as the host. Anyway, enough about Strictly.
You know so much, Isabel.
I just blooming love Strictly. I do. Anyway, should we take a look at the weather? Craig Snell has your forecast.
Good morning. It was a wet weekend for most of us. What does the weather have in store over the next few days? Find out shortly.
Thank you, Craig. You can join in any of the discussions. GB Views at gbnews.com, or you can tweet at GB News. OK, it's going to be another busy, speculative week in Westminster. concerning the Chancellor.
Yes, Jeremy Hunt's keeping his cards close to his chest, as well he might, ahead of his big autumn statement on Wednesday.
Tax cuts are just one of the measures being mulled over, and the Chancellor says everything is on the table as he seeks to revive the economy. But will he cut any taxes?
Well, one idea that's popular amongst Conservatives is to cut inheritance tax or income tax. However, the Chancellor was at pains on Sunday to warn against any moves that could fuel inflation.
That if we're going to be a dynamic, thriving, energetic, fizzing economy, we need low tax and we need taxes to be lower than they are at the moment. We're not going to do anything irresponsible, particularly by which I mean anything that fuels inflation.
But it's not just the Chancellor in the spotlight. Foreign Secretary David Cameron, he will be introduced to the House of Lords today, a week after his unexpected appointment by Rishi Sunak. Let's get the view now of Andy Williams here on this political commentator. David Cameron being introduced to the Lords.
Yeah, who'd have thought that this time last week, a few hours before he was made Foreign Secretary. I think it's really interesting. There's sort of what's in it for him, what's in it for David Cameron, and what's in it for the government. So let's take the first one. What's in it for him? Well, he's bored. You know, he's had seven years since he lost his job effectively as Prime Minister, and he was only 49 years old when that happened, so he's still young, and I think he wants to do something meaningful and interesting again. I think he probably thinks he has a contribution to make. I don't think it will hurt his ego to go back into government and sort of stride around being a statesman. But then looking at why would the government appoint him? Well, I think it says something about the calibre of people in this cabinet, that Rishi Sunak had a look around the Conservative Party and thought, nope, none of my MPs are good enough to do this job, to be Foreign Secretary. I have to bring back someone who was Prime Minister 7 years ago. I think that's actually quite damning on the Conservative Party.
Interesting, though. I mean, you say, like, he's bored and he lost his job, but actually he had plenty of jobs, as well we know.
He did.
He talked about public service, and I thought it was quite a noble statement from him, and also this idea that he's got a huge ego. Well, actually, for a Prime Minister to come in a lower position, you have to have a certain type of personality, don't you, to be able to not be the top dog when you've actually been not only the Prime Minister but the leader of the party for 12 years. And lots of people have come out, I think of Mark Harper, the Transport Secretary, saying actually he's one of the few that doesn't have a big ego. I mean, like or loathe his politics, his ego apparently isn't huge.
Yeah.
Which is unusual.
No, it's interesting. I mean, look, there's definitely a public service element. I'm sure that's the case, because otherwise why would you do it? You'd be sitting on a beach somewhere. He doesn't need the money. Absolutely. But I think we have to be honest and say these senior politicians, and I've come across many of them in the last few years, you know, one thing they tend to have in common, regardless of their politics, is a big ego. And there's no role that you can take in business, there's no consultancy role that you can take that compares to striding around on the world stage. And I think he probably sees, you know, to be fair to him, at a really significant and difficult moment in geopolitics with the Israel-Palestine crisis and what's happening in Ukraine, he probably thinks he has a contribution to make, and that maybe he can do something to ease some of those crises.
He probably only has a contribution for a year, when you think about it.
Yeah.
You know, with the election, and it doesn't look as though it's going to end well.
Indeed, and I can't imagine him continuing to serve as shadow Foreign Secretary, for example, but we shall see.
What about the contribution the Chancellor has to make? Is this his big moment to carve out his legacy and be, you know, someone going for growth and cutting taxes, which so many in his party have been begging him to do for so long?
Well, he's running out of time, isn't he? I mean, we've got two major fiscal moments before a general election. We've got this and then the budget in the spring. And that something needs to happen that's going to turn the tide for this government. You know, there has to be a moment that starts to narrow that gap in the polls, and whether it's a significant eye-catching tax cut or a major programme of investment, he needs to do something that's going to be that kind of rabbit out of the hat, as we say, on major days like we're going to see on Wednesday. But, you know, the challenge for Jeremy Hunt and for Rishi Sunak is that the Conservatives' record on the economy in the last 13 years is really not good. on their own terms, they say they're the party of low taxation. We have the highest tax burden in 70 years. They say they're the party of small business, of growing the economy. Well, the economy's basically been stagnant
I know,
for 30
but we know
years.
there have been exceptional circumstances in the last few years, nothing like a lockdown to impede those sorts of things, as well as war on a number of fronts. So that would be, probably what they would say in response to that. I suspect if we do see a big tax cut today, we might see an early election, perhaps in May next year, because they may feel actually what they were saving for this budget in the spring would be too late if they do go for a May election. Of course, there's lots of arguments why they would go early. We've got the American elections in November as well. What do you think about that?
It's possible. I mean, I tend to think that it will be October. And the reason I think that is because, A, there is no compelling reason for a Prime Minister who, on balance, is likely to lose to give up the job of his life. And the other thing is, sort of as we were talking about a moment ago, they need something significant to happen, whether it's something that falls out of the sky or a major moment that turns the tide in the polls. Otherwise, they are on course to lose. But absolutely, the flip side, and I was talking to someone who's very close to the Keir Starmer's office last week, and he was saying, the thing about Labour is they're not ready for an election. They're not ready in terms of their policy platform and their manifesto. They're not ready in terms of candidates being prepared to stand in a number of seats. So perhaps the best bet is for Rishi Sunak to kind of strike early and see if he can pull it off.
OK.
OK, Andy, thank you very much indeed, political commentator Andy Williams there. To the crisis in the Middle East, the Israeli ambassador to the USA has revealed he is hopeful a deal for the release of a number of hostages will be reached in the coming days.
Well, this comes as Hamas gunmen battled Israeli forces on Sunday, trying to push into Gaza's largest refugee camp. Despite the fighting, US and Israeli officials said a deal to free some of the hostages held in the besieged enclave was edging yet closer.
Jodham Confino is in Tel Aviv for us this morning with his view on this. It looks as though it's not a case of if an exchange will happen, it's when, Jodham.
Absolutely. We hear for the first time both Qatar, Israel and the United States all saying the same thing, that we're very, very close to a deal. And this is quite new, to be honest, because Israel has really refrained on commenting on these negotiations. But we heard the Israeli ambassador to the United States say that it's very close and he expected it could happen within days. And of course, we also hear it in the media. The Egyptian media picked it up. Washington Post came with a relatively detailed description of what this deal and what's in it. And it's about 50 hostages, children and women, who are supposedly going to be released in exchange for a 5-day ceasefire, and they'll be released in batches. Every 24 hours, there'll be a new batch of hostages released. But we have to remember, everything can really collapse at the very last second. If Hamas decides to pull, or if Israel decides to pull, the deal is off, and we'll be back to status quo.
What about this window of time, this 5-day ceasefire? Because this was the big fear about an extended break in hostilities. Is 5 days deemed to be too much?
For Israel, every day is too much. They want to systematically eradicate Hamas and pound Hamas as much as possible, but it knows that if it wanted hostages back, that's not possible. It needs to give Hamas some sort of a breathing room. And of course, this is good news for Hamas. Hamas will be able to regroup. It will be able to restock all of its things. It'll be ready for the second round of fight. And of course, fuel will also enter Gaza, aid will enter Gaza, and all of this is, of course, good news for Hamas. So it's a compromise for Israel. There's no way around it. If it was up to Israel, they would surrender unconditionally and they would release all hostages, but they're just not going to do that. We know that for a fact.
Can we talk about this footage that's been released over the weekend? People who are listening on the radio, you'll probably have seen this footage over the weekend, but it appears to show members of Hamas bringing in hostages on the 7th of October. And according to the IDF spokesperson, cars that were seen driving away from Israel were also seen at the scene of this Al-Shifa hospital. And this appears to confirm the theory that indeed Hamas, the terrorist organisation, have been using a hospital to hide and indeed to harbour these hostages. Tell us more about your analysis of that.
First of all, it's a bombshell revelation. The entire world was waiting for this footage, and everyone who's against Israel were quick to call Israel a liar when they only, quote unquote, only released the footage of weapons being hidden inside the Al-Shifa hospital. They were quick to call foul, to say that Israel was wrong and this big command center was not, it didn't exist. Now, Israel yesterday came with two different sets of footages. One of a drone that is looking at Al-Shifa before it enters the tunnel, 10 meter deep, and it's clearly a tunnel, obviously. The second footage that we saw was from inside the hospital, surveillance cameras with the time and the date saying 7th of October in the morning. And it allegedly shows two hostages, one from Thailand and one from Nepal, if I'm not mistaken. And also, of course, armed men inside the hospital. So if those two sets of evidence, if they can be verified by other countries and by international institutions, then Israel has really rested its case, and it can justify what it's doing at Al-Shifa, because Hamas has violated international law to such an extent that Israel could argue that it's definitely reasonable for it to go in there, especially when hostages were held inside Al-Shifa.
OK, Jotam, with that, thank you very much indeed.
And thank you very much for your views this morning. As for Just Stop Oil, there are going to be protests in London today from them. Alan says, we're all tired of seeing idiot protesters clogging up our roads. When do these people go to work? Free speech is one thing, but taking away our freedom to roam peacefully is another. It's costing a fortune to police these marches, and we desperately need money for charities, so why not charge a fee for policing and give it to our armed forces charities?
Also on inheritance tax, an interesting email's come in from Liz. I'm fed up with hearing only 4% of people pay inheritance tax and that it only applies to people who are very wealthy. I'm a single parent of adult children and I'm nearing retirement age. I've been able to buy my average 3-bed semi through sheer hard work all my life, and because it's in the south of the country, it's worth just over $500,000. With my few thousands in saving, this puts my family into the bracket where they will be paying inheritance tax. And a lot of people say it is, OK, it will just be 4% of people who would benefit from a cut in inheritance tax, but it's an incredibly unfair tax. So let us know if you would like to see that cut by the Chancellor on
I think
Wednesday.
you're right. In common with what Liz has to say, whether it affects you or doesn't affect you, the principle probably affects you. And you think it's right that, you know, if you were to do well and you were to invest correctly and get a property that raised itself in value, that you should be hit for that, and that you can't pass that on to your children or whatever.
And we all know that generation, the generation below sort of retirement age, all really struggling compared to their parents. So let us know your thoughts on that anyway, and all of the rest of the day's news.
We're now going to hear the thoughts on a lot of things from the Shadow Financial Secretary to the Treasury, and that is James Murray. James, good morning to you.
Hi, good morning.
James, it's right, we're going to hear from the Chancellor come Wednesday, and it's all what he'll do or what he'll not do or what he'll cut or whatever. But I was previously saying to your counterpart at the Treasury 20 minutes or so ago, the level of investment in this country is at its lowest since the Second World War. When are we going to invest in our schools, in our hospitals, in our roads, in our infrastructure in general? They will say they are paying money, but the fact remains they are not paying it at the levels that they used to be paying it, and they haven't done for so many years. But at the same time, people are suffering. The cost of living crisis continues, and people would like maybe a short-term fix in terms of tax cuts. If you were in that position, what would you do?
Well, look, if we were in government, we would be absolutely focused on tackling the cost of living crisis and getting the economy growing to make people across Britain better off. You know, there are some really important things that we would do if we were in government right now in terms of investing in clean energy, insulating people's homes to bring down bills, in terms of reforming planning to make sure we're building homes to make housing more affordable, and crucially getting NHS waiting lists down, both to help people directly and also to help the economy by helping people to get back into work. So there's so much the government should be doing to help tackle the cost of living crisis and make people better off.
Well, you're not in power yet. Maybe when we do this interview in a year's time, it will be slightly different. different, who knows? But just on the face of it, looking at what we think the Chancellor might do on Wednesday, if he does cut inheritance tax, would you reverse it?
Well, look, we just don't think that a cut to inheritance tax is the right priority at this time. During a cost of living crisis, if the government has money they can put towards the tax cut.
But would you reverse it if the Chancellor does
only
do
the
the
top
cut?
4%. Well, look, we'll set out what we'll do the other side of the election if we win the election in our manifesto. But right now, if we were in government, that would not be our priority. It should not be the priority in the middle of a cost of living crisis to have a tax cut which is focused on the top 4%. And by the way, the government haven't even said how they would pay for this. These are all rumours flying around. We saw what happened last year under Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng when tax cuts were made without being funded. It sent the economy into a tailspin, and people are still paying the price for that.
This question sends you into a tailspin, James, as well. So I don't understand, if you're not in favour of a tax cut like that, an inheritance tax cut, why you would not be able to stand here and say, do you know what, if I was in a position to reverse it, I'd do that. Why can't you just spit that out and say that? Unless you don't believe it, unless you wouldn't reverse it.
Well, look, right across the board, we have a process of setting out our manifesto ahead of the next general election, and that will depend what we inherit at the next general election and on the fiscal environment at that time. It is the right thing to do to set out our plans in the manifesto ahead of the general election. This week we have an autumn statement. We as the opposition will be providing our response. And these are still rumours about inheritance tax cuts, but if they are true, we are very clear right now we will not be supporting it, because that should not be the priority for the government.
OK, what about unfreezing tax bans? Because we talk a lot about fiscal drag and the fact that lots of nurses and teachers potentially dragged up into the higher tax brackets. Was that something that you would reverse if the Prime Minister tinkers with that today? Sorry, the Chancellor on Wednesday.
Well, look. Well, look, let's see what the government come out with on Wednesday. But I think what is very clear for us is the tax burden in this country is the highest in 70 years. Working people are feeling the cost of 25 Tory tax rises in this Parliament alone. And, overall, we want taxes on working people to be lower. But we're never going to promise anything which is not fully costed and fully funded. So we would only make commitments that we know exactly how we would pay for. But I think over time, as Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, has said, we think working taxes on taxes on working people should be lower.
And of course, you're at pains not to mislead the public or say anything that might lead to a different conclusion based on the facts. Lots of claims that Sadiq Khan didn't follow those kinds of principles and that he misled the public over the benefits of ULEZ. What's your view on that?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
My question was, do you think Sadiq Khan misled the public on the benefits of ULEZ? Lots of people saying he has.
No, I don't think so. I think Sadiq has been very clear, about what the benefits of ULEZ are. I think it's also very clear that, there has been political difficulties about that policy. We had a by-election in my part of London, in West London. People were clearly talking about it a lot during that by-election. But I think, it's a difficult policy, but it's one that Sadiq has set out very clearly his position on.
James, leave it there. Thank you very much indeed. James Murray is the Shadow Financial Secretary to the Treasury, and my main concern during his interview was why did those bells ring for 5 minutes?
Tolls.
They didn't just ring. Normally bells at 1:15, they would ring for a minute or so. They're still ringing there 5 minutes later after starting. So are they from Westminster? Is it Cathedral or Abbey?
Abbey's
next.
right there. I don't know if they're from Big Ben. But
I don't think they're from Big Ben.
No.
So long ring.
You could see it in the background of the shot with him there. We're going to be debating inheritance tax, whether or not you think it should be cut. Let us know your views. We've got a couple of guests on that in a little while. But first of all...
Well, you only think it should be cut if you benefit from it.
Or other than, as you say, on principle, you think it's an unfair concept.
Well, I think there's certain things, a death duty is a vile idea. Yeah. And they can all, you heard him on there, he's on, and he won't say he'll reverse it. So he'll be saying, look, we're happy for the Tories to do the dirty work, do the bad deed, get the cut, and we'll keep it. We'll do that. So they're all, Why can't they just say what they mean? Labour, we're now in a situation where Labour are going to say nothing about anything now.
Well, we've got the government not saying anything until Wednesday, and then we've got the shadow cabinet not saying anything, and we have this sort of holding pattern for the next couple of days. So we apologise for that, but we do our best to try and get news lines out of them.
Why do we bother doing the interviews?
Well, you never know.
with them?
Sometimes the mask slips.
Well, see, I personally wouldn't do the interviews. I would just say, thanks, bye. Have you anything to say on this? You don't? Right, goodbye. But when I say hello to the weather forecaster, Craig Snell.
Good morning. Welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. I'm Craig Snell. Well, looking ahead to today, for many of us, we're going to see a good deal of cloud around, and there still will be some rain in places. So we start this morning. Need to watch out for some heavier rain across some southern counties of England. Could be quite a wet commute here. Elsewhere, again, a good deal of cloud around and fairly damp. For parts of East Midlands, East Anglia, South East England, actually it will turn quite sunny for a time, but it won't last. And come the afternoon, a lot of us seeing a good deal of cloud. That rain potentially turning quite persistent across the far north of Scotland, but for most of us, it is another fairly mild day, perhaps maybe not as mild as it was over the weekend. Into tonight, again, a lot of cloud across the UK. That rain still fairly persistent across northern Scotland. That will sink its way a little bit further southwards as we go through the course of the night. So that will allow clearer skies across the far north of Scotland and Northern Ireland. So here, actually, we could just see a touch of frost as we start Tuesday morning. But elsewhere, it's another mild start to the day. So into Tuesday for England and Wales, it's kind of a rinse and repeat. A lot of cloud around again. Still the risk of some outbreaks of rain, especially across the east. Scotland and Northern Ireland seeing some sunnier skies. The sunshine quite hazy at times, and then later on in the day we start to see some thicker cloud and outbreaks of rain arriving to the far northwest. But for most of us, it's another fairly mild day. Top temperatures 10 to 12 degrees in the south.
So, inheritance tax, should it be cut, abolished, or leave it as it is? We'll be debating that in just a moment.
Who is it?
We're here for the show.
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests, and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Right, so what's his name? Jeremy Hunt. He's going to stand up. Well, I mean, why do we make a whole big thing about all this? I mean, it's boring. He's stretching everything out until Wednesday, and then he's going to say something or not. He's going to tickle us about. But are you going to benefit from what he's got to say? Autumn budget statement. Okay, let's bring in now on this Claire Purcell, and Claire thinks that you should abolish inheritance tax, and Emma Burnell thinks it should be kept. Emma, I don't know if you'd be affected by it or not, but I can sort of see, whether I was or not, in principle, I could see how you could get rid of it. What's your argument against?
Of course I won't be affected by it, Eamonn. I'm not in the top 4% of the country. Yeah. Nobody is, other than a very, very tiny minority of very, very rich people. Inheritance tax is a beautiful right-wing fairy tale. Everyone believes that they're going to be Cinderella eventually. No one is. And it's a great way for very rich people to protect their money from the rest of us.
Well, OK, let's bring in Claire Purcell and all of this. I mean, we had an interesting email from somebody who's worked hard her entire life. She's a single mum, she's got 4 kids, she owns a house that's gone up in value over the years and is now worth $500,000, and she's set to be clobbered by inheritance tax, or her kids are, when she passes away. Now, you know, you might say, fine, optically, this shouldn't be the first thing the Tories cut. I can understand that argument, but the principle of inheritance tax is just unpleasant, isn't it? It's a death duty.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it is. And, you know, I'm not going to be affected by it either. Let's all put the cards on the table. And there are very few people. I think it was 27,000 during the last set of figures that were affected by it. But it is one of those regressive taxes that should never have been around. You can have the argument about how many people it affects, but more and more people will come into that bracket, especially if they have property, which goes up in price. You've already been taxed many, many times on this income. I just think it is one of these most pointless set of taxes in a very complicated tax system that we have at the moment. There can be other ways of dealing with the tax system, and I just don't think that this is it.
And Emma, you would think this isn't it either, from the point of view that so many things to consider, so many things to worry about, how we raise funds, how we pay for services. You would be saying, just leave well enough alone.
We have public services that are on their knees at the moment. And Claire says this income has already been taxed many times, whilst also talking about a property that just went up in value. Nothing has been, no work went into that property going up in value. That isn't something that someone went, you know, I've worked hard all my life, and now this property that I bought in 1980 for £20,000 is suddenly worth £1.5 million. Oh my God. My hard work has created that value. That's not true. That's just property. And this is the problem. As Claire said, it is a very small amount of people with a very small amount of property that has gone up a great deal. The bottom chunk of that will not be taxed. So it isn't until it gets to a certain point that you get taxed on it. And that is unearned income.
Well, what do you say to that, Claire?
I just think it is punishing people. You say, Emma, that no work has gone into it, but realistically it has. Your income has gone into maintaining a property. You may have made adaptations to that property and increased it in value. So there is that kind of side to it too. But why should you then have to pay the government? You've already paid a stamp duty on a property, you've paid your income tax, you've paid VAT on amendments to it, and now a death tax on top of it. So no, I don't think it should be the first thing the Chancellor is thinking of. I really don't. But I also don't think it needs to be in existence. And all of the arguments around keeping it really just fall down when you look at what it does to the economy. It's one of these sort of non-inflationary taxes that goes in. It is very few people. I don't think that we need to keep it. It feels regressive. I would like to see some better taxes, better taxation system. But do I think it's top of the list? No, I don't.
And therefore, does that make it not a vote winner?
It's the vote winner for certain people. I think that there will be people who are going to be affected by it, who may well be affected by it in the future, who are looking at it, especially in those blue wall seats, if we're going to bring it down to politics, and it will be incredibly popular. Is it enough to swing votes towards the Conservative Party at an election? No, I don't think this is a particular vote winner. It's one of those very dry, very boring pieces of tax. I think people want to look at something that's going to affect them now, immediately, and put money into their pocket. So yes, it's a vote winner in certain areas, but if you are also looking at the spread of the country, there aren't that many people.
And just briefly, to remind us what it actually involves, am I right in thinking if you own a property over £325,000, once you die, 40% of that goes to the taxman under current rules? I mean, you know, Emma, when you hear it like that, a lot of people would say a £325,000 house in the south of east of England doesn't necessarily make you a particularly rich person.
My flat's probably worth over that. Very, very happy to pay for the NHS to get off its knees when I die.
Okay. Very generous of you. I'm not sure everybody would agree, but two very interesting points of view there. Thank you both very much indeed. If you've got a view, gbviews@gbnews.com, or you can tweet at gbnews with that one. Now, earlier today when we had Paul Coyte in for sport and we talked about the Australia team winning the Cricket World Cup, we talked about the Max Verstappen winning the Formula One Las Vegas Grand Prix, but the big news of the day was a man who lost not one, not two, but 3 golf clubs on the course. How is that possible?
Dutchman Joost Luitman. So he's playing in the DP World Championships yesterday in Dubai, which, by the way, was won by Nicolai Højgaard, the Dane. So he goes to the 8th tee and hits a bad shot. I mean, before we have the footage of this, what have you... I mean, not that you would ever hit one. I know that, well, there was the time that you hit the woman, wasn't there, in the pro celebrity thing? When you hit the ball and it hit... Was it full on?
Right, straight forehead, boom.
Right.
Killed her.
But had, you know, not be so worried about her, are you a golf club flinger?
No.
What about
are you
just a range fling? I mean, I have thrown a remote control in rage at my husband once.
Have you?
I was pregnant at the time.
Right, OK. Well, Nick, I can tell you that Joost was not pregnant. So there were no raging hormones involved in this whatsoever. So anyway, just hits a bad shot. So we'll just have a look and see how this happens. I mean, this is quite incredible that happens in professional golf. So there we are. Now, he's hit the ball up the tree. So he's hit the ball towards that, and so he's flung the club up the tree, although he didn't mean to, but it's got stuck up the tree.
So is that his caddy I'm seeing climbing up the branches?
Yeah, there's a caddy. Now, he's at the bottom, so then what happens... See, look, that's the marker. Look, he's just thrown things up there.
Trying to get it down.
But then he threw another club to try and get the club that he'd lost up the tree. Then
where's the ball?
The ball has gone somewhere, you know, but it's not up the tree. The ball was not a good shot, but he was so angry he flung his driver. So the driver's gone up. Now he's flung another club up the tree to try and knock the other club out. He is having an absolute nightmare. I mean, talk about when your head goes.
So do no officials approach him and say, "Hey, boy, calm down here," or...
I think everybody, if you see them all standing around and just thinking, my goodness, he's just completely lost it.
Second and third ones didn't look so much ragey as trying to get the first one down, in his defence.
Exactly.
The
But
first
then
one might have been in
the
range.
third one is like, then they're trying to poke it with the that they hold up where the ball
The
is.
sail
So they're
sign.
trying to. He actually, I don't know if we saw it there. He actually tries to jump. He gets about this far off the ground, but he's just a tree
well,
for crying
let's
out
play
loud.
it again. Just
I don't
as
know
we
if you
talk over
see
this.
the jump. He just jumps to try and get it. There's no way he's ever going to get that.
And we do have loads of people who listen on the radio, so I just always want to flag with these sorts of things. You can check this out on our GB News website as well. Pictures are pretty entertaining.
I think I'm describing it quite beautifully, though, aren't I? Quite beautifully.
Painting a picture very well.
Absolutely. So anyway, the three clubs are up there, Eamonn. The three clubs are up there. He then moves away and he's like, well, that's it, I'm off, and I'll play with 9 clubs or whatever. So then
but is that legal?
Yeah, well, that's OK. You can't over-club. You can't have too many clubs in your bag.
But you can under-club.
But you can, exactly. If you'd wanted to go around with just a putter, you're allowed to.
Really?
So then someone does manage to get up the tree and then bring the clubs over to him, and he just says he's had a terrible week and a terrible day. But sometimes when you see red and you just can't carry on, this is what happened to Eust. Even happens to the best of us.
Happens to the best of us.
Even happens to the best of us.
But it usually happens to the worst of us.
You know what, strangely, it usually does happen to the worst of us. Like I said, there was one and it was wet and the club flew out of my hand and it literally landed in someone's garden. I never found it. I never found the club. It was my favourite club.
Yeah, when your glove becomes sort of soapy almost with the wet.
Yeah.
You know, it's a bad... You know, people talk about what are the worst conditions to play golf in. Heavy rain.
I can't be doing with golf. I'm a fair weather golfer. I can't be doing with it's raining like that. See, maybe what they should invent is, you know how goalkeepers, like the old goalkeeper gloves, they were like the
grippy.
That sort of grippy stuff that used to be on table tennis bats. Maybe if you had that on a golf, you grip.
Yeah.
Then you would have no problem.
Okay.
I think there's money in this.
Well, there we go.
Except it wasn't raining in Dubai.
It wasn't.
No
That was just
excuse there.
pure anger. That was him just chucking it.
Very good, very, very good. Of course, I have found clubs going around the course before.
You haven't, have you?
I have, yeah, which you've brought back to the clubhouse.
Oh, you didn't think...
No, because
I'm afraid...
You bring it back. Some of this may have dropped out of someone's bag, you know, so you just
keep
bring it back
surely,
at the end.
of course.
No.
What about balls? If you find a ball, do you keep the ball?
Balls, I pretend. I just think, oh, for that.
That's it. That's fair enough. And one more. Have you ever kicked a ball between us? Whereas it's slightly out of play, winter rules. No. Me neither, Eamonn.
That says a lot.
That
says a lot about somebody's character.
You're only cheating yourself. That's what you're doing.
OK. Very good, my friend. Thank you. Paul will be back 8:20. Still to come.
She showed us hitting 79 doesn't mean you don't still have the moves. We'll be discussing Angela Rippon as she becomes the latest celebrity to be eliminated from Strictly.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only three people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this? It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Here's where we're going to talk about lots of stories that are making the headlines today. We've got political commentator Suzanne Evans, and guess what? Political commentator Mike Buckley as well. Very good to see you both. Look, let's start with the Gaza situation. So, Mike, we're seeing video from the Israeli army that says that this is the first solid evidence of a Hamas tunnel network underneath the Al-Shafia hospital.
So, I mean, obviously we're aware there's a propaganda war going on between Israel and Hamas, as well as a real war. So we're assuming that this is true. Even if it is true, it doesn't really change anything. I mean, we're all well aware that Hamas has had a network of tunnels that's enabled it to do the awful things that that it's done in the last few weeks, and it's also enabling it to continue operating. So this doesn't really tell us anything new, I don't think, really. I mean, what is maybe a bigger story about the hospital is basically non-functioning. It is unable to care for the people of Gaza, and it's the biggest and has formerly been the only functional hospital in Gaza.
But I do think, as you say, there is this propaganda war, and this is actual evidence to show that there is a tunnel under this specific hospital, and I think that is important evidence, you know, because ultimately...
Because how low can you go? You know, they're shielding themselves underneath sick and dying people.
I mean, from Hamas's perspective, this is just a logical choice. Put themselves in what is presumably one of the safest places. I'm not defending it or saying that I like the fact that it exists.
But it's the effectiveness of it.
From their perspective, that was a very logical choice.
Yes, but also breaches international law, so then it calls into question, I mean, apart from the fact that they committed terrorist
pretty much everything Israel has done in the last few weeks as well.
Yeah, I mean, why wouldn't this be true? Hamas are terrorists. We saw what they did on October the 7th, beyond human comprehension, really. This is a clear, as you say, violation of international law. But why is anybody surprised about that? Look at who they are. Look at what they do. Israel's been talking about this tunnel network under the hospitals for several weeks now. This is finally the proof. This is proof that Hamas is using patients, children, as human shields. It is using a hospital as a war
But does
centre.
it justify
absolutely
bombarding a hospital where there have been long-term sick, then until yesterday, newborn babies, and as you were saying in the last hour, something like 12 or 13,000 civilians, 70% of whom are women and children killed?
Absolutely, and you know, it's been said, it's from Hamas's perspective, that's where they're going to put it, because they're terrorists, because they're evil.
I mean, I think if it was me and I was in command of Israeli forces, I'd be saying, right, we're coming for you when we invade Gaza, and we're in Gaza now. We're coming to that hospital. We'll evacuate the hospital, wherever it is, but then we're going to blow the innards up of that right afterwards. It's like you give them a warning and you let them know that to take.
The issue, I think, is that Hamas, as we know, has been telling the Palestinian people not to move, not to go south, not to get over the border.
Yeah.
Well, except people have gone south, and the south is now being bombed just as the north was being bombed. You know, the Israelis said, go south, you'll be safe. People are not safe in the south. There's nowhere in Gaza that is safe.
No.
Which is why we've seen these horrendous casualties.
It is just hideous.
It is.
Guys, Suzanne, let's talk about financial advice here and whatever. And we're seeing... this is not our strong point, Isabel, these pension funds. But we're talking about pension funds being reinvested and put somewhere riskier than they would normally be. And that's creating a bit of a kerfuffle.
Yeah, so let's put this story into context. So basically, the London stock market's not been doing very well. We've had several companies that have left the London stock market in favour of New York or elsewhere. We've had lots of initial public offerings by British companies, and they've listed in New York rather than London. So the government is getting a little bit edgy about this and has been trying to find ways in which to boost the British economy and boost the London Stock Exchange. So it came up with this great idea, as it saw it, to get people to invest in unlisted companies, to invest in British companies that it thinks are going to do well. So basically, we've got a scenario when the government is trying to pick future winners. And the pension companies said, OK, right, we'll have a look at this. We might well go along with it. And now they have looked at it and they're saying, actually, no, you know, our job is to make money. Our job is to be able to enable people to, when they get to retirement, to be able to live for the rest of their lives off their pension, cash in what they're allowed to under the government rules. So basically, it's all falling apart. The other issue they've had is that investment companies are getting a little bit nervous about the GB economy and UK PLC, if you like. They've seen flip-flopping on HS2. Let's not forget that whether you support the expansion of HS2 or not, or whether you support the government putting a lid on it, some of it, the fact is it's costing jobs, because their contracts have been signed with companies. People are going to be fired. Same with net zero pullbacks. I'd support those personally, but it means that perhaps the landscape, if you like, for UK PLC is not quite so clear as it was. So pension companies are getting jittery about this. Quite
well, also heading into an election, that helps contribute.
Well, Mike and I were talking there about how people... I mean, we're talking about people who will be taking profits from top-end pension investment here. But how you would even exist on state pension, for instance. How on earth, we were just talking about, you know, whether you go to a pizzeria, whether you go to a cinema, whether you go... The cost of everything is just absolutely incredible.
Well, there are millions of people in this country who cannot make those choices anymore. I mean, the rise in inequality under this government and the failure of this government to... I mean, wages haven't grown in this country since 2008. You know, this government's handling of the economy, given austerity, given hard Brexit, given Liz Truss, has been absolutely catastrophic. And that has a real impact on people's lives. I mean, there was a story in one of the papers a few weeks ago saying 100,000 children now live in homes where their parents can't afford to buy them a bed. They're sleeping on the floor in their parents' beds. That's in Britain. This is not in a developing country. This is in the UK.
I think this puts a situation where you cannot now have a Conservative government in the form of Jeremy Hunt on Wednesday who can stand up and say, we are careful with your money, we've invested your money wisely, the country is in a strong state. Isabel did highlight all the things that went against wars, COVID, pandemic, all that sort of thing as well. But all of that aside, you couldn't point to the opposition and say they would be any worse.
No, not at all. I mean, and I think one of the things that Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves have done very well is set out their stall as people who will be much better at handling the economy than the Conservatives. And as we know, through looking through history, the Conservatives lose power when people decide that they are no longer competent at running the economy. It was the case in the 90s with Black Wednesday, and it's been the case now, particularly with Truss, but also Rishi Sunak's doing no better.
You could look across to the Eurozone and inflation largely lower than it is here. They also face the same economic challenges in terms of war and the pandemic. So why is our economy in such a bad state if it isn't down to Tory mismanagement, as Mike would have it?
To be honest, I think it's a misnomer to say that we're any worse than anywhere else. I don't think we are. Germany is in a technical recession now. Yes, Eurozone inflation is down to 2.6, which is about 2 points less than ours. But ours has come down quite dramatically recently. I also have to take slight odds with Mike when he's saying wages haven't grown. Wage growth has outstripped inflation of late, so things are changing. But Could the opposition do any worse? Well, I don't know. That remains to be seen. They might surprise us.
Yeah, but you know what? I think it's easy for anybody to tax. I think you can come around and say, well, kind of more of your salary, more of your salary, whatever. But people, individuals, or, I mean, anybody can go into a company and say, we're going to cost cut at GB News, we're going to get rid of the newspapers, and there's going to be no flowers on the table now and whatever. And I've lived through this umpteen times with different regimes. But a person who can actually say, we can generate money for this company or for this country, they would get my respect. And I would look and I say, so how do you generate money for the company? You frack, or you drill oil or gas or whatever it happens to be, all the horrible things that nobody wants to do. So what other ways are there, besides taxation, to make money in this country?
Well, one of the ways is increasing international investors' confidence in the UK economy, which dropped off a cliff after the 2016 referendum vote, and that hasn't recovered. I mean, this story about the pension funds is the government desperately trying to get that back on track, but it isn't going to get back on track until international investors look at our country and think, A, we've got more competent governance, which we don't look like, having had 4 or 5 prime ministers in 6 or 7 years, and the fact that the economy isn't doing very well.
I suspect Suzanne will have a different perspective, given you're former deputy leader of UKIP.
Well, deputy chair, but I think it's regulation as well, Eamonn, I think, is a way to get the country moving again. There is so much red tape now if you're running a business. It's a minefield trying to win.
Absolutely, and I would like to say, everybody I know that runs a business, everybody will complain about the red tape and what goes on.
Well, the irony is, of course, that Brexit massively increased red tape on business rather than reduced it.
No, the European Union massively increased red tape. The problem with this government is that it hasn't reduced it fast enough.
The big problem with this government is they stand up and it would actually make you have sick in your mouth listening to them saying, we are the friend of small business. No. Well, let's get some small businesses to say if that's the case.
Well, I mean, they gave small businesses no help in the pandemic, for example.
OK, we've got to talk about one success story, and that is Angela Rippon, who is 105 years of age. And, I mean, what fortitude she has. So tell us about Angela Rippon on Strictly. She got through to week 8, Blackpool.
Well, I mean, she's just incredible, isn't she? I mean, you look at her, I mean, genuinely, she's the same age as my mum. My mum's an incredible woman, very healthy for her age, thankfully. But she would not be doing that on the telly.
No.
So I think we all just look at her and just have massive respect. And personally, I mean, I don't particularly watch Strictly, but I'm sad that she's out. Because I think, A, she's just a beautiful dancer. I mean, look at her there. But also just what a wonderful woman.
But I think there's lessons for older people in life, which is dancing seems such a joyous thing. People they smile when they do it. It's healthy in terms of aerobic exercise and things. And as you say, look how graceful she looks.
Well, I mean, she can get her leg almost behind her ear, can't she? She is like bendier than most 20-year-olds. So, incredible woman. And of course, she's sat in this chair many times, sat in here when I've been off. So she works hard as well, and she's sort of showing no signs of letting up.
Dancing is a great way of exercise as you get older. I do Scottish dancing.
Do you?
And a lot of older people do it. I've even seen a woman in a wheelchair doing it, and it's incredible to see. It's magical.
Are you talking about Scottish reels, or are you talking about
Scottish
Highland Fling?
Yes, and not really Highland Fling. Scottish reeling. I love it.
Oh, it's brilliant.
Well, I mean, again, I would say I've seen that in Irish pubs. Somebody gets a fiddle out, and then somebody just starts reeling about the place, or whatever it is, and all is well with the world. Guys, see you again in 40 minutes' time. Thank you very much indeed. Suzanne Evans and Mike Buckley.
Here's Craig Snell, though, with your weather forecast this Monday morning.
Good morning. Welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. I'm Craig Snell. Well, looking ahead to today, for many of us, we're going to see a good deal of cloud around, and there still will be some rain in places. So we start this morning. Need to watch out for some heavier rain across some southern counties of England. Could be quite a wet commute here. Elsewhere, again, a good deal of cloud around and fairly damp. For parts of East Midlands, East Anglia, South East England, actually, it will turn quite sunny for a time, but it won't last. And come the afternoon, a lot of us seeing a good deal of cloud. That rain potentially turning quite persistent across the far north of Scotland, but for most of us, it is another fairly mild day, perhaps maybe not as mild as it was over the weekend. Into tonight, again, a lot of cloud across the UK. That rain still fairly persistent across northern Scotland. That will sink its way a little bit further southwards as we go through the course of the night. So that will allow clearer skies across the far north of Scotland and Northern Ireland. So here, actually, we could just see a touch of frost as we start Tuesday morning. But elsewhere, it's another mild start to the day. So into Tuesday for England and Wales, it's kind of a rinse and repeat. A lot of cloud around again. Still the risk of some outbreaks of rain, especially across the east. Scotland and Northern Ireland seeing some sunnier skies. The sunshine quite hazy at times, and then later on in the day we start to see some thicker cloud and outbreaks of rain arriving to the far northwest. But for most of us, it's another fairly mild day. Top temperatures 10 to 12 degrees in the south.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
Affects us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning. It's coming up to 8 o'clock. It is Monday, the 20th of November. You are very welcome, and you're tuned into Breakfast with Eamonn and Isabel. You're very welcome as well.
I feel just better for being here now. You're cheery, joyous.
I've missed you over the last few days.
Why, where have I been?
Well, you've been gallivanting around.
It's the weekend.
Yeah.
Oh, you mean you missed me over the weekend, do you?
Yeah, I did miss you. Yeah, just in spite of all our constant contact.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's nice. Let's draw some. Look at that. 8 o'clock on the dot. Here's what's leading the news this morning.
Well, ahead of this week's autumn statement, pressure's really ramping up on the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt to cut taxes. He's insisting everything remains on the table.
Israel's IDF has released TV footage claiming to show hostages being taken into Gaza's Al-Shifa hospital on the day of the Hamas October attack It comes as talks begin about an imminent release of hostages.
After years of campaigning, South Korea is set to put an end to the controversial practice of eating dog meat after a rise in the number of young Koreans against the practice. We'll be chatting with the director of the Humane Society with a special guest who's long campaigned over the issue.
That's coming up very shortly here in the studio. Israel's IDF has released that footage.
Already shown that.
Sure as heck.
Repetition.
Sure as heck. I find no. As soon as you give a signal, you know, somebody will cut you up. So always be very careful. What are you doing here?
I'm just
Saving
I'm going to
the
do this.
day.
I'm going to go like this. I was doing the hand jive in the background. I thought that's what we were doing.
What was that?
The Macarena.
What film was that in? Was that the Grease?
That was probably Grease, wasn't it? It's all this and all this. Yeah,
no,
yeah.
it's not. It's that other thing where they're all weird and wear stockings and things.
What? Oh,
the Rocky Horror Show.
That one where we.
The thing that always gets me. There's so many men who literally lick their lips in playing those roles.
I know.
Those stilettos.
Yeah.
Definitely not me. You'll not see me that. I remember doing Children in Need one night at the BBC, and it was full of guys who you could just tell were loving being in stockings and stilettos.
Well, why not?
I could name them for you.
Could you now?
As well, all famous
We
names.
haven't got time for that.
They loved it, but I was Elvis that night.
Oh, not again.
Well, at least
you're good at it.
At least I wasn't walking about in knickers.
Listen, for me, you're Elvis every day.
Well, come on ahead. Do you know, I saw there was a show. I came in to work this morning, there was a bus shelter, and they had a big poster about some sort of Elvis show. I thought, that's good.
That's good.
Something else.
Well, you two better go to that.
I know one line, although it's not actually Elvis, it's actually Kurt Russell as Elvis.
Yes. Yeah, he was
and that's,
good.
Lisa Marie, Daddy's got to go on stage right now. I just want to say Daddy loves you. And I interviewed Kurt Russell, and I said, could you say the line for me? And he said, what line? I said, can you do Lisa Marie, Daddy's got to go on stage right now? You're actually doing the lip as I'm saying this. And he went, I'm sorry, I can't do that because it took me a very long time to get into character. And I'm like, come on, I've just done it, but he didn't want to know.
You said that so fast, I don't even know what you're saying.
Lisa Marie, Daddy's got to go on stage right now. I just want to say, Daddy loves you. Lisa Marie, Daddy's got to go on stage right now. I just want to say, Daddy loves you.
Oh, that's quite sweet.
So I don't know how you could do that without getting yourself in the zone.
I am in the zone.
Will you get yourself in the zone for sport later on?
I will, yes, I will. I'll try my very best. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, well, we're going to get in the zone now for the forecast. It was a rubbish weekend. What's it going to be like this week?
Good morning. It was a wet weekend for most of us. What does the weather have in store over the next few days? Find out shortly.
Now, one of the things we want you to email about is golf clubs, and have you ever lost golf clubs or balls on a golf course? Because Paul Coit was showing his film, and I think he might show it again at 8:20, of a guy in a tournament yesterday in the Middle East who lost 3 clubs. Not balls, he lost 3 clubs, right? How do you do that? Has it ever happened to you? Tell us your story on gbviews at gbnews.com, or you can tweet
at GBNews.
Right, we're going to do a lot of political talk this week about nothing, really. What will the Chancellor cut? What will he not cut? Jeremy Hunt is keeping his cards close to his chest. This is all going to happen on Wednesday. It is the autumn statement.
Yes, and tax cuts are just one of the measures being mulled by the Chancellor, who insists everything is now on the table as he seeks to revive the economy. But which taxes might he cut?
Well, one idea popular is cutting inheritance tax. When I say popular, I mean popular amongst Conservatives. However, the Chancellor was at pains yesterday to warn against any moves that might fuel inflation.
Earlier, we spoke to the Exchequer Secretary to the Treasury, Gareth Davies, to get his reaction to possible tax cuts and on what to expect from Wednesday.
As we've seen last week, we've managed to get inflation down now to well below 5%. We've cut that in half like we committed to at the start of this year, and that lays the foundation for economic growth. And so this autumn statement will be focused on boosting growth, and there'll be 2 parts to that. First of all, stimulating more business investment and ensuring that we increase workforce participation. So those 2 things is what the autumn statement will focus on, because ultimately we need to get our economy growing.
But with inheritance tax apparently on the agenda, here's what the Shadow Financial Secretary to the Treasury, James Murray, had to say.
It should not be the priority in the middle of a cost of living crisis to have a tax cut which is focused on the top 4%. And by the way, you know, the government haven't even said how they would pay for this. These are all rumours flying around. We saw what happened last year under Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng, when tax cuts were made without being funded, it sent the economy into a tailspin, and people are still paying the price for that.
Well, the government's new Food Security Summit starts today, which aims to tackle problems caused by changing weather patterns.
Well, Rishi Sunak will team up with the tech mogul Bill Gates and Bill Gates' wife after announcing the initiative at the G20 summit in September. He's expected to start a speech in an hour's time, and he'll also make a later speech to update you on the economic situation ahead of the autumn statement on Wednesday.
Well, let's bring in Jennifer Nadell. She's a barrister and also the Director of Compassion in Politics. And you want specifically to talk about this global summit on world hunger. Tell us what we can expect to hear from the Prime Minister on this.
Well, the Prime Minister is definitely trying to reset Britain's moral position, and his new Foreign Secretary, David Cameron, has said that he is on a moral mission. And of course, if you look at many of the issues that are top of the news agenda in Britain, chief amongst them migration and the refugee and asylum crisis, one of the most significant drivers of that is climate change and mass migration forced by changes in climate. And that is only going to get worse. So if we want to prevent the worst excesses of climate change and the impact that that has on us here in terms of these huge population moves, the most effective way of doing that is trying to create stability and prosperity in the countries from which people are currently fleeing. So that is going to be a main focus of the conference as well.
That's very interesting because, you know, Rishi Sunak hasn't done anything to increase the amount spent on foreign aid. It's something we talk about a lot on this programme. Foreign aid obviously would directly help with this particular situation. And I know it's something that Lord Cameron feels strongly about. He would like to see an increase on the current levels given because it brings stability around the world and fewer people coming to our shores. Is there a tension, do you think, between this sort of previous position of a previous Prime Minister and the current, what's the word I'm looking for, administration?
I think that's a really good point. There is a huge tension because, of course, Britain was a world leader. We committed 0.7% of our budget to foreign aid. And then back in 2020, we cut that commitment and we lost our moral leadership as a result of that. There have been stated intentions to return to that when possible. But the cost to us of not helping to ensure prosperity and safety in countries that are less prosperous than ours are absolutely huge. So there is a tension. There's a tension between the inward focus that we have within this country at the moment and our role as a world leader. So this summit is an opportunity to show world leadership, but it's happening at a time when we have really squandered our position as a world leader and lost a lot of our standing on the global stage.
And what do you expect to hear from the Prime Minister in terms of that tension? Because he's obviously not going to announce an increase in foreign aid. We know how hard up we are at the moment. We're all talking about what to expect in the autumn statement on Wednesday. But there's no suggestion we're suddenly going to be paying a higher percentage of GDP. So is there a sort of sense of perhaps mixed messaging or even hypocrisy in what the Prime Minister might say today?
Well, there's definitely an allegation of hypocrisy, you know, and you were just talking about the budget, and at a time when we have 3.8 million people in the UK living in destitution, to talk about cuts to the wealthiest 4%'s inheritance tax bill is completely at odds with the moral leadership that the Prime Minister is trying to show at this global food summit. So there is an inherent tension, but there's also an opportunity because if Britain does step back into its leadership role and start practicing what it preaches in terms of being a moral leader, that can have a huge impact. And short of raising the budget back to the 0.7%, there are other moves that we can make. We can look at restructuring debt. We can look at pausing debt. We can look at helping to facilitate the world's countries coming together and investing money in trying to find solutions to mitigate the worst aspects of climate change, and also the terrible state we have, where we have enough food on this planet to feed everyone, but we have 1 billion people on this planet who are food insecure. We have 2 million children dying every year because of malnutrition, and all of that is avoidable. And of course, the British government played a major role back in 2015 in setting the UN's goal of alleviating hunger, zero hunger, by 2030. And we're not anywhere near getting there. But by showing leadership, by galvanizing, by bringing together all those nations that have made that extraordinary commitment, hopefully there will be some edging forward in a more positive direction.
Just lastly, Oxfam talking today about the filthy rich plundering the planet and the emissions of just 12 billionaires out-polluting 2.1 million homes. And they actually mentioned Bill Gates as one of those billionaires who are involved in all of that. Now, he said flying on his private jet doesn't make him part of the problem. Do you agree?
I think it's very easy to single out individuals, and of course Bill Gates has devoted an extraordinary amount of money to trying to solve some of the world's most intractable problems. So I don't want to be drawn into a debate about who's good or who's bad, because I think it isn't about the personalities, it's about the principles. We live in a world where we have allowed a few individuals to accumulate a disproportionate amount of wealth, while millions and billions go without food security. So there is something wrong in this picture, and really we need a redressing. We need a redressing in terms of global governance, and we need a redressing in terms of taxation. No one needs to be that wealthy, and it doesn't serve any of us to live in a world that is as unequal as it is, whether that's nationally here in the UK or globally in the world. And, you know, we now have the conflict in Gaza. We have 1.5 million people who are starving and without water as we talk. So these are really important, pressing issues, and it's time for action, not just talk.
OK. Jennifer Nadel, barrister and Director of Compassion in Politics, thanks for talking to us this morning.
To the crisis in the Middle East now, and the Israeli ambassador to the USA has revealed he is hopeful a deal for the release of a significant number of hostages will be reached in coming days.
About 240 hostages were taken during Hamas's deadly cross-border rampage on October the 7th. Well, earlier we spoke to the freelance journalist Jotam Confino, who's in Tel Aviv.
The first time both Qatar, Israel and the United States all saying the same thing, that we're very, very close to a deal. And this is quite new, to be honest, because Israel has really refrained on commenting on these negotiations. But we heard the Israeli ambassador to the United States say that it's very close, and he expected it could happen within days. And of course, we also hear it in the media. The Egyptian media picked it up. Washington Post came with a relatively detailed description of what this deal and what's in it. And it's about 50 hostages, children and women, who are supposedly going to be released in exchange for a 5-day ceasefire, and they'll be released in batches. Every 24 hours there'll be a new batch of hostages released. But we have to remember, everything can really collapse at the very last second. If Hamas decides to pull, or if Israel decides to pull, the deal is off and we'll be back to status quo.
What about this window of time, this 5-day ceasefire? Because this was the big fear about an extended break in hostilities. Is 5 days deemed to be too much?
For Israel, every day is too much. They want to systematically eradicate Hamas and pound Hamas as much as possible, but it knows that if it wants its hostages back, that's not possible. It needs to give Hamas some sort of a breathing room. And of course, this is good news for Hamas. Hamas will be able to regroup. It will be able to restock all of its things. It'll be ready for the second round of fight. And of course, fuel will also enter Gaza, aid will enter Gaza, and all of this is, of course, good news for Hamas. So it's a compromise for Israel. There's no way around it. If it was up to Israel, they would surrender unconditionally and they would release all hostages, but they're just not going to do that. We know that for a fact.
Can we talk about this footage that's been released over the weekend? People who are listening on the radio, you'll probably have seen this footage over the weekend, but it appears to show members of Hamas bringing in hostages on the 7th of October. And according to the IDF spokesperson, cars that were seen driving away from Israel were also seen at the scene of this Al-Shifa hospital. And this appears to confirm the theory that indeed Hamas, the terrorist organisation, have been using a hospital to hide and indeed to harbour these hostages. Tell us more about your analysis of that.
First of all, it's a bombshell revelation. The entire world was waiting for this footage, and everyone who's against Israel were quick to call Israel a liar when they only, quote-unquote, only released the footage of weapons being hidden inside the Al-Shifa hospital. They were quick to call foul, to say that Israel was wrong, and this big command center was not, it didn't exist. Now, Israel yesterday came with two different sets of footages. One of a drone that is looking at Al-Shifa before it enters the tunnel, 10-meter deep, and it's clearly a tunnel, obviously. The second footage that we saw was from inside the hospital, surveillance cameras, with the time and the date saying 7th of October in the morning, and it allegedly shows two hostages, one from Thailand and one from Nepal, if I'm not mistaken. And also, of course, armed men inside the hospital. So if those two sets of evidence, if they can be verified by other countries and by international institutions, then Israel has really rest its case, and it can justify what it's doing at Al-Shifa, because Hamas has violated international law to such an extent that Israel could argue that it's definitely reasonable for it to go in there, especially when hostages were held inside Al-Shifa.
Now, the Korean practice of eating dog, yeah, you heard me correctly, has been criticised, but recently there have also been increasing oppositions from young South Koreans.
And after years of campaigning, animal rights charities in the UK have finally got a breakthrough, and dog meat is to be taken off the menu and banned in South Korea by the end of the year.
This is Claire Bass. Claire is Senior Campaigns Director at Humane Society International. And she's here with the star of the show, Henry. And Henry could have been on somebody's plate yesterday with Brussels sprouts and carrots or whatever. And tell us about Henry's story. Henry's a lovely-looking dog.
Thank you. Yes, he's gorgeous. He's Humane Society International, my charity, we rescued Henry and 170 other dogs from a dog meat farm that he was born on in South Korea back in 2017. So we've had him for 5 years now.
Claire, would you say a dog meat farm?
Mm.
Right. Immediately I'm thinking of a farm in the UK, say, for instance, and everything's regulated and dogs are in certain pounds and whatever it is, and they reach a certain weight and then they're shipped out and whatever. How organised is a dog meat pound in South Korea?
Well, I mean, South Korea is the only country that really sort of factory farms dogs for their meat. I mean, the dog meat trade happens, sadly, in a number of countries in Asia. But South Korea is unique in that it farms dogs. So some farms can have, 500, 1,000 dogs even on a single farm in exactly, tiny barren cages, wire floors, so their claws, go through the mesh. Their waste just collects up underneath them. They're appalling places.
Not the same conditions that we would expect farming pigs or farming cows, for instance.
Well, I mean, to be perfectly honest, Eamonn, I mean, all animals that are bred to end up on the dinner plate, can suffer horrifically, and whether that's a pig on a farm in the UK or a dog on a farm in South Korea, the suffering can be exactly the same. But Korean dog meat farms are uniquely appalling places. The noise, the smell, just the desperation in these dogs' eyes is really overwhelming.
Oh, gosh, so how old was Henry when you were able to rescue him, and how did you manage to get in there?
So, yeah, Humane Society International, we work with, we started working to campaign against the dog meat trade because of the suffering back in 2015. And we realised quickly that there were a lot of farmers who wanted to leave the trade and who wanted, it was increasingly not lucrative, it was increasingly stigmatised. So we worked with them to give them a way out of the industry and help them into a new humane livelihood. So we met Henry's dog meat farmer. We worked with him to agree to close the farm. We rescued Henry and all 170 dogs.
Wow.
And he's now, engaged in, I think he's chili farming or growing mushrooms or some other non-animal crop, which is a fantastic news story, obviously. And now we have the ban coming through.
And why has that come about? I mean, we were talking about the role of young people in this, but increasingly, literally, their taste has changed.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, dog meat's never been really a mainstay of Korean cuisine. It's varied in popularity, over hundreds of years. But over the last couple of decades, 10 years in particular, it's seen a massive decline in popularity, particularly younger people just don't want to eat it. So 86% of Korean people say they don't eat and wouldn't eat dog meat, and almost 2/3 of people support a dog meat ban, which really amazingly, news last week, the government said they're going to bring in the next couple of months. So it's phenomenal.
I suppose that begs the question, what will happen to a number of the dogs that are in these farms at the moment? Is there a bit of an emergency to try and rescue dogs like Henry? Because you were telling us just before we went live how traumatised he was when you first got your hands on him.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think the amazing thing about dog meat dogs, and we've rescued almost 2,700 dogs from dog meat farms so far, the amazing thing is how forgiving they are and how resilient and how willing to trust and love they are again. But yeah, I mean, it's a huge challenge. We can't deny that. And there's something in the region of 1 million dogs on dog meat farms.
So do they bring the dogs in fully grown? I mean, are the dogs, they're literally like a dog snatcher that goes out and steals dogs and puts it in the back of a van and then brings them to the farm where they're sold off? Or are they bred over 6 months or a year to fulfil the optimum weight?
Yeah, mostly the latter. So Henry, for example, was born into a cage on the dog meat farm. And yeah, there is breeding. There's a breeding cycle of puppies born, to be fattened, to be turned into meat. But there's also an issue where abandoned pets can end up being sort of dumped at dog meat farms. And that's why we see such an amazing variety of breeds, everything from Chihuahuas to retrievers to, mountain dogs. There's, it's like a horror show version of Crufts.
Everything's on the menu.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Did you choose Henry to rescue, or did Henry choose you?
I think it was a little bit of both, yeah. I mean, I went to the farm as part of the rescue team back in 2017 that closed the farm, which is a huge operation, and, to get all the dogs out and onto their loving homes. And Henry was particularly shut down. He was really, really... just didn't really want to interact with the world. I think he just thought, this is a horrible place. I don't really want to be here.
Look how happy his face is now.
He's a very happy boy.
Yeah.
So it took a good long time before he was scared of absolutely everything. He was scared of his own shadow in the oven door.
Henry.
And, now he's just the most amazing ambassador, to end the trade.
What do you want British people to do? How can British people help?
Well, I think, British people have already helped massively, and we're so grateful to all our supporters who have helped us to make this dream come true of banning the dog meat trade in South Korea. It's just unbelievable that this suffering is going to come to an end. And I think the other thing people can do is often we find that thinking about the suffering of dogs for the dinner table can trigger people to think about the suffering of other animals, they're caught up in the food industry. And so, we can all stand up to animal suffering every time we sit down to eat and, enjoy so many of the amazing plant-based options that we have available here in the UK.
So, OK, South Korea are doing their bit. That's going to finish by the end of the year. Thank goodness for that. What other countries have we to turn our attention to?
Well, the trade, very happily, is on the decline across Asia. So countries including China, Indonesia, Vietnam, they're all seeing a really big growth in the movement in young people in particular in those countries who are fighting against the dog meat trade. This isn't an issue of East versus West. We care about dogs and they don't. There are, so many passionate campaigners, incredible people who want an end to this trade in those countries every bit as much as we do. And so, we're seeing bans come in. Jakarta recently in Indonesia banned the dog meat trade. That was phenomenal. Taiwan, Singapore, Hong Kong. It's changing really rapidly. And, for for dogs like Henry and all the other Henrys out there, it can't happen soon enough.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Claire, and bringing us Henry as well this morning to bring it all to life. How could you ever want to eat a little Henry? He's just so precious.
Well, Claire...
Lots of people will be inspired as well to support you this morning. How can they do that?
Thank you so much. Go to hsi.org and find out about all of our campaigns. Dog meat's just one of so many issues that we work on to protect animals all around the world. Please do go to hsi.org and find out more about what we do. Thank you.
So HSI stands for the Humane Society International. Look them up. Claire is from them. Thanks, Henry.
Yeah,
thanks very much
Henry.
indeed.
You're a superstar. So sweet. Makes me want one desperately. It's dangerous. There we go. We're going to take a little break and have a look at the weather. Here's Craig Snell with all the details.
Good morning. Welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. I'm Craig Snell. Well, looking ahead to today, for many of us, we're going to see a good deal of cloud around and there still will be some rain in places. So we start this morning. Need to watch out for some heavier rain across some southern counties of England. Could be quite a wet commute here. Elsewhere, again, a good deal of cloud around and fairly damp. For parts of East Midlands, East Anglia, South East England, actually, it will turn quite sunny for a time, but it won't last. And come the afternoon, a lot of us seeing a good deal of cloud. That rain potentially turning quite persistent across the far north of Scotland, but for most of us, it is another fairly mild day, perhaps maybe not as mild as it was over the weekend. Into tonight, again, a lot of cloud across the UK. That rain still fairly persistent across northern Scotland. That will sink its way a little bit further southwards as we go through the course of the night. So that will allow clearer skies across the far north of Scotland and Northern Ireland. So here, actually, we could just see a touch of frost as we start Tuesday morning. But elsewhere, it's another mild start to the day. So into Tuesday for England and Wales, it's kind of a rinse and repeat. A lot of cloud around again. Still the risk of some outbreaks of rain, especially across the east. Scotland and Northern Ireland seeing some sunnier skies. The sunshine quite hazy at times, and then later on in the day we start to see some thicker cloud and outbreaks of rain arriving to the far northwest. But for most of us, it's another fairly mild day. Top temperatures 10 to 12 degrees in the south.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure. So join me, Nana Acquia, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Can you be quiet? What is this? It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now, according to a new report by Oxfam, the richest 1% emit as much CO2 as the poorest two-thirds of the population on the planet. And this indicates it would take 1,500 years for someone in the bottom 99% to produce as much carbon as the richest billionaires do in 1 year. So we're asking the question this morning, should private jets be banned? Let's discuss this with former political correspondent Peter Spencer, who says absolutely not, and the co-founder of Safe Landing, Todd Smith, to debate it. Let's start with you, Peter. Why set out your defence, then, of these carbon-emitting PJs, as they're known?
Well, it's rather hard to actually defend them because it is an egregious example of the imbalance here, and I have to say the UK is a particularly bad example. It just strikes me as being a little bit crude to actually try to ban them any more than banning the super rich, their super jet, their super yachts or their mansions. It would seem to me a more sensible approach to actually tax them, squeeze them until the pipsqueak, as someone once said. There's air passenger duty, whack that right up, and also a jet fuel for these things, whack that right up as well, and basically discourage them from doing it anything other than doing it for recreational purposes. Do it when it's only necessary. But there's a much broader context to all this, which goes back to the Uxbridge by-election. As we remember, the Tories hung onto it by a whisker, thanks largely, it is thought, to the fact that the punters didn't take too kindly to the ultra-low emission zone being extended to their manor. Now, the Tory strategists thought, hey, silly old Sadiq Khan, let's create a wedge issue with the Labour Party, so let's go a bit soft on the green stuff, let's go a bit soft on the targets for emissions, let's go a bit soft on the motorists. Oh, and by the way, let's have loads more fossil fuel drilling in the North Sea. Now, I can see why they did it, but I have to say that to my mind, that is absolutely crass, grotesque political short-termism, especially when you put it in the context of a summer where we had one extreme weather event after the other, and pretty much all of which were put down to human-induced climate change.
Yeah, well, whether we blame it on ULEZ and Sadiq Khan or not, I'm wondering whether Todd agrees with you. Would you be satisfied with more taxing of private jets, or you just want to see them off the runways for good?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with Peter. We should definitely be taxing. I mean, for a start, jet fuel is absolutely tax-free, whereas normal motorists are paying for their petrol and diesel pay up to 50% in tax. So if we just tax jet fuel alone, we could raise something like 6.7 billion in the UK, which could then be used to, home insulation, making public transport either cheaper or for free, and renewable energy infrastructure. The bottom line is with private jets and our current political system, which doesn't seem to serve the interests of either aviation workers like myself, a former airline pilot, or people that are just going about their ordinary lives trying to get to work. Currently, the economic system that we have and this current look, this ban on, essentially there was a climate assembly in the UK, both in the UK and in Scotland and in France. These are democratic processes where ordinary people got together and made common sense decisions beyond the short-term thinking of board members and politicians, and they all agreed that we should ban polluting private jets. There is an option in the future, perhaps, for electric, battery-powered private jets, but that technology is not there yet. And we should have a frequent flyer tax levy. Again, if we had a frequent flyer tax levy, given that the vast majority, 77% of the people in this country wouldn't need to change their flying habits at all. It's just a very small minority. Then, if we have this frequent flyer tax levy, we could raise a further $5 billion from that, and once again, that could benefit home insulation and general public transport.
We've been talking this morning, Peter, about this food summit, this global summit on world hunger that's being co-hosted by the government and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Now, Bill Gates is one of those that's been mentioned in this Oxfam report as one of these billionaires responsible for tons and tons of greenhouse gas emissions. I mean, I can understand the argument that Todd's putting for somebody like that, although you can see he's doing good work whilst he's at this summit. But what about for our politicians who have to go and travel around the world, if not to broker international peace, but for deals, for cooperation? We saw the Trump plane and some of that footage there. We know that Rishi Sunak often chooses to fly because he says his agenda is absolutely packed. I mean, isn't there a space somewhere for these private jets, if not for the billionaires? Public servants,
It's an interesting question that I had the privilege when I was with Sky News for travelling on Blair Force One, which was a really cool plane, man. But letting that pass, I mean, look, yeah, sure. Sunak himself they've had the finger pointed at him for using private jets for things. I mean, I'd kind of half justify this, because if you've really got an awful lot of stuff to do and you haven't got much time to do it in, then sometimes that's the only way to set about it. So, I mean, I kind of let them off a little bit. The real problem, I think, is these guys who are doing it kind of recreationally. They're just doing it to show off. Well, clamp down, make them really, really pay for it and regret the decision to go for it.
Todd, we've been talking a lot this morning about the autumn statement. We're expecting to hear about possible tax cuts and things that are going to alleviate people's living conditions when everything is so expensive at the moment. Do you hope in any way that you might see some imposed taxes on private jets, or perhaps indeed some alleviation of the cost of living as a result of this?
Yeah, absolutely. As I say, if we have a frequent flyer tax levy, which wouldn't impact 70% of the UK population, 15% of emissions come, 70% of emissions come from 15% of the UK population in aviation, and so essentially, look, 3,300 private flights in 2022 from London to Paris. Why can't these private jet users just get the train like the rest of us? And why is it that the Eurostar is extortionate? If we had this tax on frequent flyers, on jet fuel across the board, because it is ultimately frequent flyers, first-class travellers and private jet users, which are ruining it for everyone else. That includes aviation workers and ordinary people. So if we make them pay, we might actually be able to secure a future for the aviation industry and ensure that we can continue to go on that one hard-earned holiday that we've saved up for and we deserve. And ultimately, I remember going to Barbados. I grew up on a council estate in Essex as a kid. To become a pilot was an absolute dream for me. Obviously, I'd much rather be flying right now, but to have that opportunity to go to Barbados as an 8-year-old was an extreme privilege. And it isn't, I have to make this very clear, it isn't ordinary hard-working people that save up for that one hard-earned holiday that we're targeting here. This would be the ultra-wealthy, high emitters that are causing most damage to our planet. And, it's ultimately the low emitters, low-income people that are suffering most and having to bear the brunt of this.
Well, Todd Smith, at one point I could see Peter Spencer and I were both nodding along in agreement, so we weren't so much debating there as agreeing on a lot of what you were saying. Thanks to both of you for getting involved. I would like to throw the gauntlet out there. Anybody at home who's watching this who wants to put a defence of private jets to us this morning. At the moment, nobody prepared to do that on the panel. But let me know if you do think that they should be kept forevermore. GBviews at gbnews.com. Stay with us. Still to come, there's a new president of Argentina and masses of people have taken to the streets to celebrate. We'll be discussing that and more in Headline Makers next.
Who is it?
We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests, and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Joining us to go through some of the day's headlines. We have got political commentator Suzanne Evans and Mike Buckley. Let's start with Nigel Farage in the jungle. The first episode of I'm a Celebrity went out last night. What did you make of his performance?
I have to say I didn't see it. I can imagine he probably was Nigel, you know, his usual kind of charismatic self. I mean, I find him objectionable, and I think actually it's quite irresponsible of ITV to be putting him on.
Well, you want him cancelled, do you, Mike?
I'm sorry?
You want him cancelled?
I just think he's been a toxic figure in our country for a long time now, and if this is an entertainment show, I think it's the wrong place for him to be. And I think actually the media's given him too much time and attention over the last 15 to 16 years anyway.
There's a growing trend, isn't there, of politicians now being celebrities, and he's just the latest in a long line of those. I mean, it started, I think Nadine Dorries was the first to go in.
She was, I remember.
Who else
she
has
was
been in?
slated
Stanley
for it.
Johnson, former MEP, father of ex-PM. We've had Matt Hancock and now Farage. So, you know, are politicians kind of celebrities now?
To a degree they are, but is that a good thing for society? I don't know. I mean, I would suggest not.
There was always a saying, wasn't there, that politics was show business for ugly people. And I don't know, maybe that's true. I'm not saying that Nigel Farage or Matt Hancock are ugly, although I appreciate that some people might think their policies are. But I actually think Nigel did a very good job. He came across as being very hard-working. He rolled his sleeves up. He got on with the job. He stuck his face in a van full of snakes and was rooting around in Gunge for tokens for food. But I don't think we've not seen the real Nigel Farage yet, I don't think. Be interesting to see if we do.
He can't do a number of the challenges, I believe, because of that terrible air crash that nearly killed him. I don't know what his injuries are, but it rules him out of a number of them, which I have a feeling means he's going to be nominated for a lot of the eating challenges, which are arguably the worst.
But you say we haven't seen the real Nigel Farage. Who is the real Nigel Farage?
Well, I think the Nigel Farage that we've seen so far was quite nervous. But showing some leadership skills. I think perhaps as he goes on in the series, he'll become more confident. He might open up more about his personal life. You know, Mike's attitude, really, Nigel's really suffered from this idea of him being toxic. And it's taken a huge toll on his personal life. As he said to me just the other day, I can't walk out in London to go and get a pint of milk without having some kind of abuse.
He has made that choice over the last 15 or 20 years. You know, he has chosen to be the person he's been. He's caused the disruption he's caused in our politics. He's got his objectionable views towards migrants and other people, vulnerable people. You know, he's chosen to be this person. If you can't walk out in public, he's made that choice continually over the last 15 or 20 years. He's only got himself to blame.
Everybody should be able to walk the streets, and certainly somebody that just says what a lot of people are thinking.
I mean, I don't at all approve of somebody being attacked or heckled in the street, but he has made that choice. If that is his reality, he has chosen that to be his reality. Nobody's chosen that for him.
We've heard a lot of politicians say they can't do that. I mean, we talk about David Cameron getting shouted at for all eternity on the same issue over Brexit. And Boris Johnson now, lots of people abusive towards him in the street, apparently. So is that just par for the course for politicians? We're in a kind of intolerant society
These are people who've done huge harm to people in our country. We were all poorer because of Brexit.
Tony Blair, because of Iraq, he also gets a lot of problems on the street.
Well, I mean, millions of people died. Understandably, people are going to be attacked because of these things. I'm not saying it's a great
people
thing,
from going into politics?
There are consequences.
Well, if we all calm down, a way of doing this and wellness factor and being at peace with yourself, Suzanne, is to do what?
Well, apparently, you thought it was goat yoga. Oh, no, we've moved on from goat yoga. It's now cuddling cows is the latest well-being trend, according to an article in today's Times. So for £40, you can have 2 hours cuddling cows in a farm in East Yorkshire. Now, I don't blame the farmer here who has seen her business devastated by cuts in the dairy industry. You've had the TB crisis. There's all kinds of issues why dairy farmers are having a really tough time of it at the moment. But I have to question this. You know, cows are not pets. They are big, potentially dangerous animals. There have been 74 cow fatalities since June 2000. Most of them farm workers, but a quarter of them public out walking.
More than that.
I'm really concerned about this idea that
between 2018 and 2022, I just looked it up. Cows attack between 3,000 and 4,000 people every year. They are the UK's deadliest animal.
Yeah, they're not pets, like I said. And I think this idea that they can be nice, cuddly things that you can go and sit with for a couple of hours, I'm slightly nervous about this. I think there might be a problem here.
There is a lot of power in connecting with, whether it's the dog Henry that we saw a few moments ago, whether it's nature. I think a lot of our problems as human beings is becoming detached from our sort of animal...
Totally agree.
Do you agree?
I
think that's why people find, you know, the gimmicks, maybe goat yoga, but there's some truth in it.
With this story, I just think if this is going to help some people deal with their mental health issues or emotional issues, whatever, then great, crack on. I would imagine it's a completely safe environment because this will be managed by the staff. So I don't think this is a safety issue, really. I think where cows do attack people is when they feel they're under threat or they feel their young are under threat, you know, in an open environment in fields. And maybe that's something that should be addressed, but that's different from this story, I think.
Yes. I was nearly killed in a cow stampede. You know the way they have in the cowboy movies and things, the stampede. They were all let out for milking, and they were down a hedge road, and I was in the middle of the hedge road, and I remember I must have been 5 or something at the time. But I had to run and run and run and run. Yeah. And then I was out. I used to cross-country run, and I remember running over a mountain one day in the mist, and it was like, you know, 8 a.m. in the morning or so.
And you ran into a field full
field full of claptrap. They had cows clap everywhere, all over this field, and you were dancing around it. And then out of the mist appeared this demon-eyed cow. And then another one. They surrounded me, and it was
Oh no!
It's not.
Yeah.
It's
not funny because they're in a herd. When one of them panics, you get these stampedes. That's why there's so many.
I'm sure they didn't mean me any harm.
Cow injuries. No, they're very pretty.
But you're right about getting back to nature. You know, most of us live in the cities now, and we have lost touch with nature. We have lost touch with our place in the universe, almost. I think.
Yes.
And it's not a good thing.
So, Mike, getting back to nature, does that include cutting down ULEZ cameras? And here's a story of a ULEZ protester dressed up as
the Grinch, rather oddly. I mean, I find the whole ULEZ thing just genuinely quite odd. I mean, what Sadiq has done by bringing this in is save people's lives and save kids' lives and save people from asthma. And that is, unreservedly a good thing. So quite why some people in society, but particularly the Conservative Party, have leaped on this as, inhibiting people's rights. Very, very few people have to pay the charge. There is some help put in to help people, buy a new vehicle. Not enough, but actually it's the government's responsibility rather than Sadiq Khan's responsibility. And the government put a lot of money into a scrappage scheme in Birmingham when a similar scheme was put in place by a Conservative mayor. When it's Sadiq Khan, they've refused to do so.
Mike, what about the cash that he's generated from this? Where's that gone? There are
that
questions
would have been
about
ploughed back into TfL, I would imagine.
Into pensions or salaries for tube drivers rather than necessarily measures that are helping people. If it was all about improving people's air quality, presumably that money could be used in another way. A lot of people see it as a huge cash cow.
It is, absolutely. And I'm sorry, Mike, I don't accept your idea that it's saved lives. Even on the modelling, which we know is highly dubious, they decided it would save a maximum of 9 lives. There's no proof of that at all. It's just modelling. The Advertising Standards Authority is currently investigating the mayor's claims on ULEZ because it was based on modelling and not real, actual reality. You might remember that Imperial College was asked to do some research into whether or not it would save lives, and they said that the impact would be insignificant. But then suddenly they seem to have some money made out of this research.
Well, it's significant if it's your child,
and put under pressure, and suddenly it's now dramatically reducing air pollution. I think it's nonsense, really.
Well, you may think it's nonsense. However, there's been lots of evidence out there suggesting that it's not.
Just
And
modelling,
it's just
no
logical,
evidence,
isn't
just
it?
modelling.
You cut air pollution kills people in this country, kills people across the world every year. It's a major, major source of ill health and of shortened life expectancy.
The air in London
and so the fact that it's now cleaner as a result of ULEZ has to be a good thing.
Also, Eamonn and I were always saying
the air quality in London is massively increased since when I lived in London and first moved to London in 1989. There's a dramatic difference. You can see it.
Because politicians have made a series of good decisions. This is one of those good decisions.
It's because technology has improved and the car manufacturers have made good decisions. The government said we should all drive diesel cars, which we now know are massive pollutants.
I remember at the time we knew there were massive pollutants then, and still the advice was to go ahead with all of this.
Yes.
And everybody was trying to get out of diesel cars, and then you thought, no, well, we're being incentivised to go back to them. It was a nonsense. The thing I would say about air pollution is the London Authority, if they're so worried about air pollution, why do they grant planning permission incessantly along the main arteries and at main junctions, horrendous junctions, and they're packed with apartment blocks and whatever. And I think, who the heck would buy one of those? Well, somebody does. None of them are lying empty.
And they're all expensive as well. It's in London. Should we talk about something a little bit less controversial? Glastonbury, all sold out in 57 minutes. I have to admit, my husband was one of those people on refresh yesterday morning trying to get his hands on. I'm quite relieved he didn't manage it. Suzanne, are you going to be going to Glastonbury 2024?
I'm not a Glastonbury fan. I'm not really good with loud music and loud noise, really. But I'm not surprised they've sold out. I mean, I suppose you've also got these ticket agencies, haven't you? I think have algorithms that buy everything up, so
annoying.
Perhaps leaves the ordinary person struggling a little bit, so that annoys me. But I also had to laugh, really, because what is Glastonbury if it's not a sort of left-wing love-in as well? Do you remember when Jeremy Corbyn spoke to an adoring crowd in Glastonbury? And yet, to my horror, people are paying £340 for a ticket? I mean, that's a lot of money.
And if you buy off those agencies, you'll be paying $750.
Every year I go to Ascot and I put it on Twitter and all the lefties pile on saying, how dare you go to Ascot? Glastonbury's twice the price.
Well, they're not having a go at you because of the price of going to Ascot, are they?
Well, they think it's a snobby thing to do, but I say no, it's great. It's half the price of Glastonbury, and I figure I'm putting money into the economy. I'm supporting horse racing, I'm supporting millinery, I'm supporting fashion, I'm supporting the hospitality industry.
Glastonbury's
I think
5
it's a good
days.
thing.
And Isabel supports the British drink industry.
Hey, stop it. Look, no one heard that, luckily.
I do have champagne.
We've got to wrap it up. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for reviewing our papers this morning. We say goodbye for now. Craig Snell's going to be here with your weather, and we'll be back in a few minutes' time.
Good morning. Welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. I'm Craig Snell. Well, looking ahead to today, for many of us, we're going to see a good deal of cloud around, and there still will be some rain in places. So we start this morning. Need to watch out for some heavier rain across some southern counties of England. Could be quite a wet commute here. Elsewhere, again, a good deal of cloud around and fairly damp. For parts of East Midlands, East Anglia, South East England, actually, it will turn quite sunny for a time, but it won't last. And come the afternoon, a lot of us seeing a good deal of cloud. That rain potentially turning quite persistent across the far north of Scotland. But for most of us, it is another fairly mild day, perhaps maybe not as mild as it was over the weekend. Into tonight, again, a lot of cloud across the UK. That rain still fairly persistent across northern Scotland. That will sink its way a little bit further southwards as we go through the course of the night. So that will allow clearer skies across the far north of Scotland and Northern Ireland. So here, actually, we could just see a touch of frost as we start Tuesday morning. But elsewhere, it's another mild start to the day. So into Tuesday for England and Wales, it's kind of a rinse and repeat. A lot of cloud around again. Still the risk of some outbreaks of rain, especially across the east. Scotland and Northern Ireland seeing some sunnier skies. The sunshine quite hazy at times, and then later on in the day we start to see some thicker cloud and outbreaks of rain arriving to the far northwest. But for most of us, it's another fairly mild day. Top temperatures 10 to 12 degrees in the south.
Stay tuned, Christopher Hope from Westminster, because it is going to be a busy week.
For him especially.
Yeah. Tax cuts, will they come? Do we want them? Do we need them? In what direction do you want them? Or do you think that government money should be ploughed into the infrastructure of the country after years of underinvestment and neglect?
All of that in just a moment.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquia, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, very good morning to you. The time is 9 o'clock exactly. This is the 20th of November, it's a Monday morning.
And this is Breakfast with Eamonn, Holmes and Isabel Webster, and here's what's leading the news this morning.
The Chancellor is keeping his cards close to his chest ahead of Wednesday's autumn statement. Earlier we spoke to the Exchequer Secretary, that's Gareth Davies, to get his reaction on possible tax cuts and what to expect.
As we've seen last week, we've managed to get inflation down now to well below 5%. We've cut that in half like we committed to at the start of this year. That lays the foundation for economic growth. And so this autumn statement will be focused on boosting growth, and there'll be two parts to that. First of all, stimulating more business investment and ensuring that we increase workforce participation. So those two things is what the autumn statement will focus on, because ultimately we need to get our economy growing.
Well, the government is to host a global summit today on world hunger alongside the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. The PM's expected to unveil a long-term plan for new international cooperation, and we'll have all the latest when the Prime Minister begins his speech in the next few minutes.
Just Stop Oil is set to cause chaos as they kick off their Take to the Streets protest today, bound to cause disruption every day until they win their battle against oil and gas. Not popular with you, we have to say, judging by your comments this morning. It all starts in London's Trafalgar Square very, very shortly.
And what about the weather for the week ahead? Craig Snell has your Monday forecast.
Good morning. It was a wet weekend for most of us. What does the weather have in store over the next few days? Find out shortly.
GB News at gbnews.com, or you can tweet at GB News for that.
Well, the Prime Minister has just started speaking in London at the Global Food Summit about addressing world hunger. Let's listen in.
Good morning. Mr. President, ladies, gentlemen. Welcome to the Global Food Security Summit. I'd like to start by thanking our summit partners, Somalia, the UAE, the Children's Investment Fund Foundation, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. But I'd also like to thank my good friend Andrew Mitchell for his incredible work, not just on today, but also for the International Development White Paper, which we're proud to be launching. Thank you all for your participation and support for today. We live in a dangerous world, a time of growing threats, strategic competition and conflict. Now, many of these challenges, like the war in Ukraine, have a direct impact on the poorest in the world. Others threaten to draw attention away from their plight, putting at risk the vital progress made over recent years. Now, with this white paper, we're answering those challenges, changing our approach to deliver in a changing world. Because we know that you don't lead merely with strength, but with compassion. So we're going further to help the poorest and support those suffering in humanitarian crises. We're not just applying our aid budget to deliver results on the ground, but also Britain's expertise in development and our leadership in science, technology and innovation. And we'll do all of this not by acting alone or seeking to dictate the way forward, but through building even deeper partnerships around the world based on mutual respect. It's only by working together that we will get the Sustainable Development Goals back on track. And that starts with redoubling our efforts to deliver the goal on zero hunger. It can't be right that today, in 2023, almost 1 billion people across the world regularly do not have enough to eat, that millions face hunger and starvation, and over 45 million children under 5 are suffering acute malnutrition. In a world of abundance, no one should die from lack of food, and no parent should ever have to watch their child starve. Now, I'm proud of everything the UK is doing to provide immediate relief. We're one of the top 4 donors to United Nations crisis response. We've doubled our aid for Palestinian civilians with an additional £30 million. We're clear that Israel has the right to defend itself. It has been attacked in the most brutal manner possible by an enemy that hides itself in hospitals. It must also act within international humanitarian law. The situation on the ground is truly tragic and getting worse. We're pressing hard for unhindered humanitarian access in Gaza and for urgent and substantive humanitarian pauses to get in food, fuel and medicine, because the suffering of innocent civilians must end. We're also leading the way in helping Ukraine get its grain out through the Black Sea and into the hands of those in need. But because the scale of the global hunger crisis is so staggering, today we're going further, providing up to £100 million now for the worst hit, particularly across East Africa, the Sahel and Afghanistan, and in countries like Malawi, which are reeling from climate-related cyclones and drought. Yet, as everyone here knows, simply responding in the wake of a crisis is not enough. Climate change, conflict and population rise mean ever greater challenges to food supplies. So we need a fundamental shift in the way that we approach food security, with a focus on long-term solutions to stop food crises before they start. And we need to harness the full power of science and technology to ensure supplies are resilient to threats like conflict, drought and floods. That's why the UK is working to deliver lasting solutions. And we're doing so in 4 important ways. First, by preventing the worst forms of child malnutrition. We played a leading role in the design of the Child Nutrition Fund, which supports vital supplies of life-saving food. And today I'm pleased to announce that we're building on that with a further £16 million and helping to bring in more funding, including from our fantastic philanthropic partners. Second, we're using technology to anticipate and prevent food security crises. Together with our partners, we're applying AI to model the impact of climate change on agriculture so that we can find ways to avoid future crises. And we know just how effective this can be. Our work with the government of Somalia helped them avert famine last year. And today I'm pleased to announce that we will help Somalia avoid future crises with up to £100 million of future support, enabling thousands of communities to manage water supplies, adapt their farming, and increase their resilience to droughts, floods, and other climate shocks. Third, we're supporting developing countries to build more sustainable and resilient food systems. We helped set up the Global Agriculture and Food Security Programme to crowd in public and private sector finance. And now we're driving reform of development banks, stretching their balance sheets even further to unlock more resources for food security. And that includes UK guarantees, which are releasing $6 billion of the bank's resources for development in countries in Africa, Asia, and the Pacific. Finally, we're applying our leadership in science to this crisis. As the country that over the last few years led the development of the world's first and second malaria vaccines, we're also driving scientific advances in food security which benefit millions globally, as well as supporting our brilliant farmers here at home. We've already helped develop crops that are drought-resistant and even richer in vitamins, now feeding 100 million people across Africa. And we're going further, launching a new UK CGIAR Science Centre to drive cutting-edge research on flood-tolerant rice, disease-resistant wheat, and much more. These innovations will reach millions across the poorest countries, as well as improving UK crop yields and driving down food prices. And in conclusion, this is the difference that Britain makes. Using all the expertise and tools at our disposal, helping people now and for the long term. But we cannot do this alone. And that's what this summit is all about. And it's why our approach is all about partnership. With your help, we can get the Sustainable Development Goals back on track, deliver a world of zero hunger, and transform millions of lives for years to come. Thank you, and have a great summit.
There we go. Prime Minister speaking at that Global Food Summit this morning here in London.
Just a few minutes ago, Christopher Hope, our political editor, with his take on that. So he's talking, Christopher, about his Sustainable Development Group, getting it back on track. What are his chances of that?
Yeah, he's coming out fighting now, Rishi Sunak, isn't he? Because he knows that he did cut the amount we spend as a country on aid from 0.7% of our gross domestic product to 0.5%. They're sitting out a white paper today in the government looking at how we spend aid money going forwards into 2030. They've got a new Foreign Secretary, forgive me, in charge of aid overall, Lord Cameron, to be called Lord Cameron of Chipping Norton today. He's speaking later. He said in a foreword today to his to this new white paper that he understands that the UK has to work more with countries rather than imposing aid on countries. We work as a country more closely with these countries themselves to find out how they want to spend the money that we're giving to them. The aid budget is still very big. It's well over £10 billion, much more than many government departments, but it's a part of the kind of legacy we're trying to leave and support other countries, I think, and that's why it's so important. So it's getting back on the front foot. So we'll see a lot of David Cameron today, as I say, Lord Cameron being sworn as a peer in the House of Lords and giving a speech at this same food safety summit. Elsewhere in politics, though, we are seeing a lot more speculation now about the autumn statement on Wednesday. With a speech mid-morning today from the PM, Mr Sunak, will have that live on GB News. He'll be pressed about where he might cut taxes. We know that inflation has fallen a lot to below the target he set himself this year of halving it. And so now is a time for tax cuts. But where they happen, Isabel, is the next question.
Do you sense a sort of shifting in the position of Rishi Sunak's cabinet now that Lord Cameron is, or soon to be Lord Cameron, is part of it? I mean, you're talking now about foreign aid, and I was reading over the weekend that he is said to be wanting more money to be spent as a percentage of GDP. Is this sort of the mood music that we're getting?
Yeah. Well, there's no question that Andrew Mitchell, who's the MP in charge of aid spending in the House of Commons, and his boss, David Cameron, both were against cutting the amount we spend on aid to 0.5%. 0.7% is the UN mandated number. It's the figure which all developed countries should aspire to, but very few get there. And it was a moment of intense satisfaction just over a decade ago. I remember vividly when David Cameron did get to 0.7%, increasing it from when Labour were in power. That will be a debate going forward as Britain hopefully pulls itself out of this trough after the COVID pandemic and the issues caused by the cost of living crisis and the Ukraine war and the impact of that on this country. So, yes, no question, that's for the future, Isabel. The government has become more centrist. Certainly, it's moved away from this the populist nature of the Conservative Party. Has now been replaced by people like Lord Cameron, of course, not an MP and not even a peer when he was appointed, but now about to become a peer. So this is more like business as usual. Whether that appeals to voters is a question we'll find out soon enough.
Indeed.
Christopher, we come in here in the dead of night and darkness into the studio, And I'm looking behind you and I'm thinking, please tell me that's a live shot behind him with that beautiful sky with those white puffy clouds. Is that live?
Oh, you are naughty, Eamonn. You know this is TV. That's a picture, of course.
I think it says
of a
20
nice
past
view
12 on
of
the clock.
Parliament.
I can't see that. Oh, well.
I don't even know if it's daylight outside, genuinely.
You can go away. We've dispensed with you now because if you haven't got blue clouds or blue skies to offer us, we're not interested. Thank you very much indeed, Christopher. Thank you.
Now, something exciting's happening today here on GB News. We have a brand new show. Let's take a look.
Get out of it.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Well, whatever I'm doing, I'm changing my plans. A hot new couple on telly. That isn't us. That isn't us. The dynamic duo who'll be bringing you afternoons here on GB News are Tom Harwood and Emily Carver.
we are here, indeed.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much for having us. We are so excited. I'm so excited.
You look like you're having way too much fun there already. You know, this is the news, guys.
It is the news, but I think what's really interesting is that we tend to get on and can debate the news and discuss the news in quite a fun way, and I think that's what we want to bring to afternoons from midday here.
That's where we're going, where we don't like each other.
You're going to have to learn to get on with me.
The thing is, Tom often says things, you know, that I might disagree with. Have a little quibble. We might have a little bit of a debate, but we always make up.
We do, and I think that one of the big strands of Good Afternoon Britain here on GB News is having that good-natured debate, is bringing those different perspectives in. And some of the new panellists that we're going to have are actually some very exciting names that you haven't seen before on the channel.
Such as?
Oh, so for example, we've got Janet Daly coming on today. We've got some really big names, that Ivor Kaplan, you know, the former Labour minister, all the rest of it. It's going to be some really big discussions and big topics tackled.
But as you say, Tom, you're able to tackle them, you're able to debate them, but at the end of the day, you're probably able to give mutual respect to each other.
Oh, certainly, and
I hope so.
Well, I mean, let's see how the first show goes. But no, I think it's going to be very exciting, and it's going to feel fresh, and it's going to feel new, and it's going to feel different, and that's what we want to bring to it.
Well, you know, from experience, I can tell you the daytime news shift is where all the news happens. You know, in the evenings it's all done, in the mornings it's quite often not happening unless it's abroad. Daytime's where all the courts sitting, all the parliaments are sitting. You're going to have breaking news all the time, which would be
Isabel,
super exciting.
you're completely correct, because during our airtime we've got Patrick Vallance before the COVID inquiry. We've got David Cameron being introduced to the House of Lords. That's happening around 2:30. There's lots of stuff happening across the news agenda live during our show.
And as you can see, we've got Tom Harwood's encyclopedic knowledge of Westminster, coupled with my charisma. There you go.
You're good with your numbers as well.
With my numbers, with my encyclopedic knowledge of
your
the economy
calculator
as well. With my calculator, but it's going to be very fun. I must say that promo that we just watched, absolutely freezing up there.
Oh,
it looks glorious. It was a beautiful day.
But it didn't kill your smile, Emily.
We were
You've got
mainly
the most
laughing
perfect
because our
half-moon
script was
smile.
flying all over the place. Everything kept... A light fell over. It was all very
Sounds
dramatic.
like television. Brilliant. Good stuff. Well, we will be watching, and we wish you all the best of luck with the show. Good afternoon. What's it called? Good
afternoon, Britain.
There we go. Gab. Good afternoon, Britain.
Gab. Something to make you all harmonious. Just Stop Oil. They have said we're going to cause chaos today and all this week as they get ready for a week's worth of disruption.
Yeah, so we'll be crossing to Trafalgar Square for the very latest on that. See you in a mo.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
Affects us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Right, commuters in London are set to be faced with lots of disruption from today. Climate activists are going to take to the streets to demand that the government stop all new licences for oil and gas contracts.
Have you ever changed your mind on this? Do you ever think that maybe they have a point? Because the only way anyone is going to listen to them or listen to what they're objecting about is to cause the maximum amount of disruption.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. Well, they've vowed to slow march in traffic throughout the city until the government does take action. But how much support do they have from the public?
Let's talk to our reporter, Ray Addison. He will fill you in. Ray, good morning.
Good morning to you both. Yes, this is the start of 7 days of disruption across London. They're meeting every day here at midday at Trafalgar Square. They're asking people to come from all across the United Kingdom to stand shoulder to shoulder against what they're describing as a criminal government to demand no new oil, gas or coal. Now, Dr. Graham Buss is a former principal scientist for Shell, and he is now a Just Stop Oil spokesperson. He joins me now. Dr. Buss, thanks for joining me. What can we see over the next 7 days?
What you'll see is Just Stop Oil marching from Trafalgar Square, and I would call on anybody who supports our demand of no new oil and gas in the UK to come and join us.
Now, of course, in the King's Speech, the government announced new legislation for a new annual system to actually award oil and gas licences. Just Stop Oil's tactics just aren't working, are they?
They certainly are, but let's be real about this. Our government is criminal, not just criminal, they are genocidal. They are going to cause the deaths of thousands, millions, and the displacement of possibly billions of people through the actions of continuing oil and gas. And I would say if GB News really cared about the public, about its viewers and the public of this country, they would speak the truth about how serious this is. The flooding, the loss of homes, the uninsurable houses, the fires.
But of course, Just Stop Oil doesn't actually care about the public, does it? Because you don't target the government who make the decisions, you target members of the public.
We are targeting what I absolutely accept, that we are disrupting the public. But we have also targeted the government and we have targeted the oil industry.
Thank you, Doctor. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. So we do have 7 days of action starting today. They're urging people to come from all over the United Kingdom. We've seen hundreds of arrests over the last 2 weeks. We may see more.
Thanks, Ray. Thank you. Tell you what I'm not seeing in Trafalgar Square, any people.
No, I didn't see many people stopping oil.
Do you think they're scared off or what?
Who knows?
Anyway,
A bit early in the day. We'll be back tomorrow, 6 o'clock. Looking forward to seeing you then.
we're scared off, yeah, until then. So up next, Britain's newsroom. Andrew and Bev, you have yourselves a nice day.
Good morning. Welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. I'm Craig Snell. Well, looking ahead to today, for many of us, we're going to see a good deal of cloud around and there still will be some rain in places. So we start this morning, need to watch out for some heavier rain across some southern counties of England. Could be quite a wet commute here. Elsewhere, again, a good deal of cloud around and fairly damp. For parts of East Midlands, East Anglia, South East England, actually it will turn quite sunny for a time, but it won't last. And come the afternoon, a lot of us seeing a good deal of cloud. That rain potentially turning quite persistent across the far north of Scotland, but for most of us, it is another fairly mild day, perhaps maybe not as mild as it was over the weekend. Into tonight, again, a lot of cloud across the UK. That rain still fairly persistent across northern Scotland. That will sink its way a little bit further southwards as we go through the course of the night. So that will allow clearer skies across the far north of Scotland and Northern Ireland. So here, actually, we could just see a touch of frost as we start Tuesday morning. But elsewhere, it's another mild start to the day. So into Tuesday for England and Wales, it's kind of a rinse and repeat. A lot of cloud around again. Still the risk of some outbreaks of rain, especially across the east. Scotland and Northern Ireland seeing some sunnier skies. The sunshine quite hazy at times, and then later on in the day we start to see some thicker cloud and outbreaks of rain arriving to the far northwest. But for most of us, it's another fairly mild day. Top temperatures 10 to 12 degrees in the south.
We are talking about tax. Tax. Are they finally going to cut our taxes? We think so in the autumn statement.
Let's hope so. That's going to be coming up on Wednesday. We're going to be looking forward. What are they going to do? Is there any chance they're going to reduce the tax so that they might eventually, Conservatives, win your vote in the next election? Talking of voting, friend of ours from this channel, Nigel Farage, is, of course, in the jungle. Did you watch it?
And he's doing very well. I was glued to it.
So let us know what you thought last night. And is it a risk for Nigel? Is it a professional risk going in the jungle? GB Views at gbnews.com.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at